liar paradox. This sentence is false. 6 words. No complicated vocabulary. No hidden tricks. Just a simple, self-contained statement hanging in the air like an unfinished thought. At first, you might shrug it off, a playful phrase, maybe a tongue twister for philosophers. But then, something strange happens. You try to pin it down. If the sentence is telling the truth, if it is false, then it must be true. But if it's true, then it's false. And if it's false, then it's true. And around you go, caught in a whirlpool where every attempt to find solid ground just pulls you deeper into the impossible. A loop, a glitch in reasoning itself. Logic, the sturdy bridge we cross every day without a second thought, cracks and wobbles under the weight of just one tiny, defiant sentence. You've just stepped into the world of one of humanity's strangest riddles. A puzzle so simple it fits inside a single breath, and so profound that it shakes the very foundations of truth, language, and reality itself. Welcome to the liar paradox. Picture this. The Mediterranean sun blazes high over a rocky island. The scent of olives drifts through the warm air. In a shaded courtyard, men in flowing robes gather to argue about virtue, about the gods, about the nature of reality itself. Among them is a man named Epimenides of Crete, philosopher, mystic, perhaps a trickster. At some point, maybe between debates, or maybe after too much wine, he utters a strange claim. All Cretans are liars, he says. And Epimenides, of course, is a Cretan. It sounds almost like a joke, a harmless paradox meant to annoy his fellow thinkers. But slowly, like a hairline fracture running through stone, the consequences start to show. If he's telling the truth, then as a Cretan, he's a liar, meaning he must be lying. But if he's lying, then maybe Cretans aren't liars, which would make his statement true. Truth flips to falsehood and back again, a seesaw without end. What began as a clever remark in the dust of ancient Greece would ripple outward across centuries, a tiny logical grenade tossed into the foundations of philosophy, mathematics, and beyond. From the cobbled streets of Athens to the sterile chalkboards of modern logic, the liar paradox would stubbornly refuse to be solved, refusing even to stay still long enough to be pinned down. It's not just a trick. It's a mirror, and when you look into it, what stares back isn't just confusion. It's the unsettling realization that even the very idea of truth might not be as sturdy as we once believed. Let's walk through it slowly. Suppose the sentence is true. If it's true that this sentence is false, then, well, the sentence must be false. But if it's false, that contradicts our starting point, that it's true. Fine, maybe it's false instead. But if it's false, then what it claims, this sentence is false, is wrong, which would mean the sentence is actually true. No matter how you twist it, it flips back and forth endlessly, like a light switch jammed between on and off. It refuses to settle. This is not just annoying, it's catastrophic for logic itself. Logic is supposed to be clean. A statement is either true or it's false. No third option, no loopholes. This is the bedrock of how we reason, how we do math, how we build arguments. But here, that basic law, the law of the excluded middle, collapses. This one tiny sentence is a parasite that infects the very structure of truth itself. It proves that even within the cleanest, most rigorous systems, a tiny bit of self-reference, a sentence talking about itself, can tear the whole thing apart. And worse still, if you can't fully trust a system that allows for this paradox, then how much of your reality, built atop that system, can you trust either? The liar paradox doesn't just confuse you. It quietly whispers a terrifying possibility. Maybe there are cracks in the foundations of everything. For centuries, the liar paradox sat like a splinter in the side of philosophy, irritating but ignorable, until one day, the world changed. By the early 20th century, mathematics was undergoing a revolution. Brilliant minds like Bertrand Russell, Gottlob Frege, and David Hilbert were trying to formalize all of math into a perfect airtight system. A complete and consistent logical framework, something pure, flawless, eternal. But the liar paradox, and its cousins, refused to cooperate. Bertrand Russell stumbled on a version of the same self-reference problem while studying set theory. Imagine the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does it contain itself? If it does, then it shouldn't. If it doesn't, then it should. It was the same looping trap, just dressed up in fancier clothes. This was not a cute little brain teaser anymore. It was a crisis. Russell's discovery shattered Frege's dream of a perfect mathematical foundation. on the eve of Freya's great life work being published. Freya's words in response were bleak. Your discovery has shaken the very foundations upon which I meant to build my arithmetic. And then came Kurt Gödel. In 1931, Gödel took the lurking dread behind the liar paradox and weaponized it. He showed, in his incompleteness theorems, that any logical system complex enough to do basic arithmetic will always contain statements that are true, but cannot be proven within the system itself. In other words, some truths are forever out of reach. Any system trying to describe itself completely will eventually eat its own tail. The echo of the liar paradox was now deafening. It wasn't just an irritating puzzle anymore. It was a blueprint for the limits of knowledge itself. The ripple effects didn't stop with mathematics. In computer science, the same logic underpins the halting problem. The fact that no computer program can perfectly predict whether another program will run forever or eventually stop. In philosophy, it raised chilling questions about self-awareness, self-reference, and whether the mind could ever fully understand itself. In artificial intelligence, it looms as a warning. What happens when a machine can reason about its own reasoning? What paradoxes will it trap itself in? One small paradox, uttered thousands of years ago under the Grecian sun, had quietly detonated under the very idea of certainty. And the world was, and still is, living in the aftermath. Faced with the liar paradox, thinkers across centuries did what thinkers do best. They tried to fix it, patch it, tame it, bury it. Some tried to sweep the paradox away with clever redefinitions. The first idea was simple. Maybe the problem isn't with truth itself. Maybe it's with language. Alfred Tarski, a logician in the early 20th century, proposed a bold solution. Separate the levels. He suggested that a language shouldn't be allowed to talk about its own truth. Instead, you needed layers, like floors of a building. On the first floor, you have sentences about reality. On the second floor, you have sentences about the truth of first floor sentences. On the third floor, sentences about the second floor sentences. And so on, higher and higher, an endless skyscraper of meaning. In this system, a sentence like "this sentence is false" was illegal. It had no rightful floor to stand on. Problem solved. Not quite, because reality isn't so tidy. Humans constantly use self-reference in language. We joke about ourselves, doubt ourselves, describe our own descriptions, effortlessly. Self-reference isn't a bug in how we communicate, it's a feature. Banning self-reference was like sealing a crack in the dam, while ignoring the flood bursting underneath. Others went even deeper. Some philosophers proposed that maybe truth itself needed a makeover. Maybe not every sentence is either true or false. Maybe some statements live in a gray zone, undefined, like a computer error. This birthed ideas like three-valued logic, para-consistent logic, and even wild theories involving multiple overlapping realities where contradictions could safely exist without collapsing the universe. Each fix felt clever, promising, hopeful. And yet, each solution seemed only to breed newer, stranger problems. It was as if reality, when examined too closely, blurred at the edges, refusing to fit neatly inside human boxes. The liar paradox wasn't just a mistake to be corrected. It was a mirror reflecting something deeper, something more unsettling. That our tools for understanding the world, language, logic, even mathematics, are powerful, but they are not perfect, and maybe they never can be. In the end, the liar paradox lingers, unsolved, untamed, like a splinter in the mind. Not because no one's tried to fix it, but because maybe it's revealing a truth we don't want to face. We like to imagine that reality is clean. That truth is something solid we can grip with enough effort. That if we build our logic carefully enough, stack our arguments high enough, one day we'll reach the summit and see the full, perfect landscape of understanding. But the liar paradox suggests otherwise. It whispers that truth might not be a simple mountain to climb. It might be more like a horizon, always ahead, always shifting, always just beyond reach. When we try to trap truth inside language, we create loops. When we try to formalize knowledge, contradictions leak in. When we stare into the heart of certainty, we find uncertainty staring right back. The liar paradox doesn't just challenge how we reason, it challenges how we exist. Because if the very idea of truth is slippery, then what about everything built upon it? Science, morality, identity, meaning itself. Maybe there are limits to what any mind, human or machine, can ever know. Maybe some questions were never meant to be answered. Or maybe maybe the problem isn't with the paradox. Maybe the problem is with us. The Barber Paradox. Once upon a time, in a small, tidy village, there was a rule, a simple rule that everyone followed without question. The rule said, "In this town, there is one barber. The barber is responsible for shaving all, and only those who do not shave themselves. If you were the kind of person who didn't like shaving, the barber would take care of you. If you preferred to shave yourself, you had no need for his services." It was neat. It was organized. It was logical. And the barber, diligent and precise, made sure the rule was never broken. No exceptions. No confusion. It was a small thing, perhaps, just one of many little customs that kept life running smoothly in the village. A local tradition. A tidy solution to an everyday problem. Until one day a question was asked. A simple question. The kind of question that, at first, sounds like a child's joke. Who shaves the barber? A few villagers chuckled. Some scratched their heads. At first glance, it seemed like the kind of thing you could laugh off and move past. After all, surely there was an easy answer. Surely it was just a riddle, a little curiosity, nothing more. Wasn't it? But then the laughter faded. Because when you actually try to answer the question, something strange happens. If the barber shaves himself, then he is a man who shaves himself. And by the village rule, the barber only shaves those who do not shave themselves. So he must not shave himself. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he falls into the group of people who don't shave themselves. And the barber, by rule, must shave everyone who doesn't shave themselves, meaning he must shave himself. Both possibilities immediately collapse into contradiction. He must shave himself if, and only if he does not shave himself. A logical Mobius strip. An impossible loop. What started as a simple village rule, a bit of local order and pride, suddenly rips open the ground beneath it, revealing a paradox so sharp it cuts through reality itself. The village is not neat. The rule is not logical. The barber cannot exist. There is no way, not by any consistent logic, for the barber to follow the rule. The very act of asking the question detonates the cozy little world the villagers had built. And here's the most unsettling part. This wasn't just a silly riddle for children. This little story hid inside it a bomb powerful enough to bring down entire systems of mathematics, logic, and philosophy. All because someone asked a question too carefully. Let's slow this down. Put the barber's rule under the microscope. The setup seems harmless. The barber shaves everyone who does not shave themselves. He only shaves those people. That sounds clean enough. Two groups. People who shave themselves. People who don't shave themselves and get shaved by the barber. But hidden inside this arrangement is something deeply dangerous. Self-reference. The moment the barber himself becomes a subject of the rule, he steps into his own definition. The system folds in on itself. It's like designing a perfect map of a country and then asking, should the map itself be part of the map? If the barber is part of the system he governs, he creates a feedback loop. If he shaves himself, he shouldn't. If he doesn't shave himself, he must. No matter which way you turn it, you hit a contradiction. The mistake isn't in the barber's scissors or shaving cream. It's deeper. It's in the structure of the definition itself. It tries to refer to itself while also regulating itself, creating an infinite glitch. This isn't just a cute problem. This is a fatal flaw, a sign that something fundamental about how we build logical systems can betray us without warning. A perfect rule, destroyed by a simple question. And when a brilliant philosopher named Bertrand Russell noticed this, he realized something chilling. If logic itself could stumble over such a small thing, how many bigger, more ambitious systems might be standing on the same kind of trapdoor? The story of the barber was no idle curiosity for Bertrand Russell. At the time, he was working at the bleeding edge of mathematics and logic. The dream of the era was bold, to build a perfect, unshakable foundation for all of mathematics. One of the leading architects of this dream was a logician named Gottlob Frege. Frege had devoted decades to creating a system that would finally formalize math in pure logic, a shining monument to reason. Russell admired Frege deeply. He was even studying his work when he stumbled across the fatal crack. The crack was the barber, or more precisely, Russell's paradox, the formal version of the barber story. In Frege's system, it was possible to define a set of all sets that do not contain themselves. If such a set contained itself, it shouldn't. If it didn't contain itself, it must. Exactly like the barber, the entire structure collapsed. Russell wrote urgently to Freya, pointing out the paradox. Freya, upon reading the letter, is said to have been devastated. In the preface to the second volume of his life's work, he wrote grimly, "Hardly anything more undesirable can happen to a scientific writer than to have one of the foundations collapse just as the work is finished. The dream of a perfect, contradiction-free foundation for mathematics shattered, not with a thunderclap, not with a grand disaster, but with a small, quiet question that burrowed its way into the heart of logic and hollowed it out from within." The barber wasn't just a barber. He was a saboteur planted inside the very machinery of rational thought. And if such a tiny puzzle could bring down giants like Freya, what else might be hiding, smiling innocently, in the cracks of our grandest ideas? The barber isn't the only one who shaves himself in the dark corners of logic. No, this paradox has a far-reaching shadow, creeping into the very foundation of the world's most complex systems. Let's start with computers. Think about a program designed to check if another program will ever stop running. A simple question: will it finish or run forever? Now, let's say the program tries to check itself. What if it asks, will I stop running? It's a terrifying thing for any computer. The moment the program begins to question whether it can predict its own behavior, it runs straight into a paradox. This is known as the halting problem, and it's the same problem the barber faces. The program doesn't know if it will stop because it can't know without running, but running would require it to stop running. A feedback loop, a paradox. This isn't just a quirky anomaly in computing. It's built into the fabric of self-reference. When you ask a system to evaluate its own boundaries, its own limits, you end up in an endless spiral. Take artificial intelligence. What happens when an AI is asked to evaluate its own thought process? Can it accurately self-assess its behavior? If it tries to do so, it might run into a paradox much like the barber, where the question of "am I doing the right thing?" leads to an infinite loop of questioning itself. The same recursive logic that traps the barber also traps the machine, and no amount of programming can escape this fact. But it doesn't stop there. The paradox spreads its tendrils into philosophy, where self-reference poses even more profound dilemmas. Consider the concept of identity. Who are you, really? Can you answer that question without referencing yourself? When you describe who you are, aren't you always using your own understanding of yourself to define your identity? Can you ever truly escape your own perspective? The moment we ask a question about the self, any question, we immediately fall into this trap. In trying to understand ourselves, we end up chasing our own tails, circling around in a feedback loop that never quite lets us see the whole picture. And there's something deeply unsettling about that. The self becomes a paradox, trapped in its own logic. It's the same paradox as the barber, just scaled up into the realm of human understanding. Even ethics isn't immune. Take the moral dilemma of lying. If someone lies to protect a greater good, is the lie justified? Are the rules of honesty being respected? Or are they being bent for an abstract moral reason? Just as the barber's rules bend around his own existence, ethical systems bend around the complexity of human behavior, creating circular logic that is difficult to untangle. The Barber Paradox isn't just a curious riddle in a village. It's an ancient problem wrapped in modern mystery, a question whose echo reverberates through logic, through our machines, through our minds, and even our moral decisions. It haunts more than just the barber. So, what does the Barber Paradox truly teach us? Maybe it's not just a funny riddle about a village barber who got caught in his own logic. Maybe it's something deeper, a reflection of human nature itself, our endless struggle to know and understand the world, and ourselves. The paradox doesn't just show us the limits of logic. It's a mirror held up to our humanity. We're always reaching for a perfect understanding, a flawless answer. But when we examine ourselves too closely, when we try to define our own existence perfectly, we risk falling into the same paradox. The more we try to control and categorize, the more we find that we're tangled in contradictions. And here's where it gets unsettling. Maybe the real problem isn't the paradox itself. Maybe the problem is our insistence on trying to solve it. Every time we look for perfect truth, every time we try to draw clear lines, we risk creating contradictions, loops that we can never fully escape from. The more we chase the perfect answer, the more the questions we ask spiral back in on themselves. As we've seen in logic, mathematics, philosophy, and even in AI, the moment we try to define something fully, especially ourselves, we risk creating a system that collapses under its own weight. The more we try to pin down the truth, the more it slips away, running into endless cycles. Maybe the real paradox isn't that the barber can't exist in the way we think he should. Maybe it's that we, too, are asking questions that don't have answers. We are, in some sense, the barber, trapped inside our own search for meaning. Our minds, our concepts, our definitions, all chasing each other in circles. Always running, but never truly arriving. So, perhaps there's a deeper lesson here. Maybe some questions, like the one about the barber, weren't meant to be answered. And perhaps the only way forward is to accept that not all truths can be neatly boxed up. Some things might be left unresolved, not because they're wrong, but because they were never meant to be solved in the first place. In the end, the Barber Paradox isn't just about logic. It's about us, in the grand, maddening dance of trying to understand a world that might never fully make sense. Russell's Paradox. What if the very tools we use to understand the world, our logic, our language, our most basic definitions, were secretly broken? Imagine being handed the keys to a mansion full of rooms you've never seen before. You're told that logic, mathematics, and reasoning are the sturdy walls and floors of this mansion. They are solid, unshakable, the foundation of all knowledge. But as you walk through the halls, you come across a door. You open it, only to find another door, and another, and another. Each door leads you in circles. The mansion, it turns out, is a labyrinth, not a structure at all. Your assumptions collapse. You realize that everything you knew was built on a contradiction. This is Russell's Paradox, a simple, yet profound, problem that shook the foundations of mathematics, logic, and philosophy. It's a question that threatens to unravel everything you thought you knew about the universe's structure. The set of all sets that do not contain themselves contains itself. Seems simple enough, right? But the deeper you dive, the more you realize. This question is a trap, a logic-bending time bomb planted at the heart of mathematics itself. Can you solve it before the end of the video? Is there even an answer? At first glance, Russell's Paradox seems like a simple riddle, but it's anything but. To understand it, we need to break down its key components. To put it in the simplest terms, a set is just a collection of objects or things. For example, we could have a set of all apples, a set of all chairs, or a set of all numbers. But then, what happens when you try to create a set that contains all sets that do not contain themselves? Let me explain this step by step. What is a set of all sets that don't contain themselves? Imagine we're trying to create a set, let's call it S, that contains all sets that do not contain themselves. So, S will be a list of every set that does not include itself as a member. For example, the set of all apples does not contain itself, because apples are not sets. So, this set is included in S. The set of all chairs does not contain itself, so it also goes into S. But what about S itself? Now here's the problem. Does the set S, the set of all sets that do not contain themselves, include itself? If S contains itself, it's violating its own rule, because S is supposed to contain only sets that do not contain themselves. But if S doesn't contain itself, then by its very definition, it must be included in itself, since it's a set that does not contain itself. This creates a paradox, an endless loop of self-referential confusion. The paradox is, if S contains itself, it cannot contain itself. But if it does not contain itself, it must contain itself. In simpler terms, we've created a set that both includes itself and doesn't, a logical impossibility. This isn't just a quirky brain teaser. This undermines the very foundation of logic and mathematics. It shows us that there are limits to how we can define things, and the rules we've built our systems on might themselves be flawed. Russell's Paradox reveals a fundamental contradiction hiding in plain sight. It's like trying to build a tower with bricks that constantly shift in shape, making the whole structure unstable. And the more you try to define things with precision, the more the foundation crumbles beneath you. In the world of logic and mathematics, this paradox was not just a curiosity, it was a game changer. It wasn't just a question about sets, it was a question about the very structure of how we think and reason. So, as we look deeper into this paradox, keep in mind, this isn't just a philosophical problem. It's a problem about the limitations of language and logic, one that shakes the bedrock of knowledge itself. When Bertrand Russell stumbled upon this paradox in 1901, it wasn't just an interesting side note, it was an earthquake. At the time, mathematics was riding high on a grand dream, to formalize all of math into a perfect, airtight system. Thinkers like Gottlieb Frege were working tirelessly to pin down logic, so precisely that no inconsistencies could ever arise. Frege's Grundsätze der Arithmetik, basic laws of arithmetic, was meant to be the blueprint for this dream, a majestic, towering cathedral of logic. And then Russell's letter arrived. He wrote to Frege, politely, almost apologetically, pointing out the paradox. It was as if Russell had tapped a stone in the cathedral's foundation, and the entire structure shuddered. Frege, devastated, wrote in the final lines of his book, "Hardly anything more undesirable can happen to a scientist than to have the foundation give way just as the work is finished." Russell's paradox exposed a fatal flaw. The very act of defining sets freely led to contradictions. It wasn't just an isolated mistake. It suggested that any system based on unrestricted definitions could be harboring hidden contradictions, ticking like a time bomb. This revelation didn't stay locked in dusty academic halls. It forced a crisis across mathematics. If basic logic was unstable, could all of math crumble? Philosophy. Could any system of thought claim absolute certainty? Computer science. Later on, could machines reason consistently, or would they spiral into paradox? The ripple effects spread like cracks through marble. And so the dreams of a flawless, complete logical system had to be abandoned, or at least radically reimagined. Mathematicians like Ernst Zermelo rushed to patch the holes, leading to new theories of set construction, like Zermelo, Frankel's set theory with the axiom of choice, designed specifically to avoid paradoxes like Russell's. Even Kurt Gödel, years later, would take inspiration from Russell's paradox when he proved his incompleteness theorems, showing that no consistent system could ever prove all truths about itself. In short, Russell's paradox didn't just break a system. It revealed that the dream of total, flawless knowledge might always be just that, a dream. Russell's paradox feels, at first, like a clever trick, an amusing curiosity, a brain teaser. But once you stare into it long enough, it starts to stare back at you. It forces us to ask unsettling questions. Can any system ever truly capture everything about itself without falling apart? Are contradictions an unavoidable cost of thinking, speaking, even existing? Is reality itself paradoxical? Or is it just our limited minds creating these puzzles? Maybe logic, language, and definition, those proud tools we wield, aren't pure swords that cut through reality cleanly. Maybe they're tangled nets, catching some truths while letting others slip through, and sometimes tangling us in the process. Russell's paradox stands as a permanent reminder. Even the smartest, most careful minds can build beautiful systems that hide fatal flaws. And perhaps that's not a failure, but a kind of wisdom. To know that some doors, once opened, will never close again. So the next time you hear someone say, "We just need better definitions," remember Russell's ghost, quietly smiling, and the question lingering in the background. What if reality itself cannot fit neatly into our definitions at all? Maybe the cracks we find aren't mistakes. Maybe they're the shape of truth itself. Grelling-Nelson Paradox. Imagine you're playing a simple word game. Nothing complicated, nothing philosophical, just a game of adjectives. Some words, strangely enough, describe themselves. Take short, for example. Short is fittingly a short word. Or English. English is an English word. These are called autological words, words that possess the property they describe. Easy, right? Now, think about words that don't describe themselves. Like long. Long is not a long word, it's relatively short. Or unhyphenated, which, ironically, is not hyphenated. These are called heterological words, words that don't match the property they talk about. Simple game, simple rules. But hidden in this game is a trap. One so deep, it will make language, the very thing you're using to understand this, crumble beneath your feet. And the trap is set with just one question. Is the word heterological itself heterological? At first, it feels harmless. Maybe you even think you can guess the answer in a few seconds. But the moment you step into this question, you'll find yourself stuck, trapped in a loop that no amount of cleverness can escape. All right, let's stay calm. First, remember the rule. A word is autological if it describes itself. A word is heterological if it does not describe itself. Now let's test heterological. Suppose heterological is heterological. By definition, that would mean heterological does not describe itself. But wait, if it doesn't describe itself, that fits the definition of being heterological, meaning it does describe itself, which would make it Autological, not heterological. Oh, alright, maybe we guessed wrong. Let's try the other possibility. Suppose heterological is not heterological. Then, according to the definition, it must describe itself. It must be autological. But if it describes itself, that would mean it's heterological, since it fits the very definition of words that don't describe themselves. Which brings us crashing right back to the first assumption. Either way, we end up tangled. If it's heterological, it's autological. If it's autological, it's heterological. Like a hallway of mirrors, every answer you chase just reflects back into itself. There's no stable ground, no final answer. The definitions that once seemed so clear now collapse into pure contradiction. And just like that, a simple word game has turned into a linguistic black hole, where meaning eats itself alive. This is the Grelling, Nelson paradox. A paradox not of numbers or sets or physical laws, but a paradox born purely from language trying to define itself. And it won't be the last time we find ourselves trapped like this. Because when language itself becomes slippery, everything built on language, from logic to mathematics to our deepest philosophies, begins to tremble. For a moment, it feels like betrayal. Language, the thing we trust to tell stories, to explain science, to form contracts and write poetry, suddenly refuses to play fair. It stares back at us, grinning, breaking its own rules. The Grelling, Nelson paradox doesn't just create a riddle. It shatters a deep, quiet trust we didn't even realize we were carrying. The belief that words, properly chosen and carefully arranged, can always describe reality clearly. But what happens when the very act of description becomes impossible? When asking a simple question, does this word describe itself? Collapses meaning into endless contradiction? It's like language pulling the rug out from under itself, and us falling right along with it. This wasn't just an intellectual puzzle. For those who first encountered it, logicians, philosophers, mathematicians, it felt almost like a betrayal of reality itself. If language could backfire this spectacularly, what else might be secretly broken, just waiting for us to notice? The tremors didn't stay trapped inside a word game. They echoed outward, shaking entire systems that were supposed to be unshakable. At the heart of mathematics, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a dream was growing. Create a perfect, flawless foundation. A system where every mathematical truth could be traced, step by step, to clear and certain rules. This movement was called formalism, and it carried enormous hope. If we could formalize everything, if we could express all knowledge in pure logic, maybe we could build an airtight universe of truth. But then came paradoxes like this one, sneaky, devastating, showing that even basic systems can betray themselves. If words could trap themselves, so could logical sets. If a simple definition could collapse, so could entire mathematical proofs. This wasn't just theory. Russell's paradox, which closely relates to Grelling-Nelson's, wrecked early attempts to formalize set theory, one of the cornerstones of mathematics. Suddenly, mathematicians realized, no matter how carefully you built the rules could still tie themselves into a knot. And beyond mathematics, the shock spread into philosophy, into linguistics, into computer science. Can we ever fully define truth? Can systems ever explain themselves without contradiction? Can AI ever perfectly understand language when language itself is unstable? The dream of a flawless logical universe cracked. And in the shards left behind, a new kind of wisdom began to grow. A realization that complexity and contradiction aren't bugs in reality. They're built into the code. Before we finish, imagine this. You're a traveler in a strange land where every object must carry a label. A rock must say rock, a river must say river, a dream must say dream. But in this world, every label must describe itself accurately, or be exiled. At first, it's easy. The rock is a rock. The river is a river. The dream is, well, a dream. But then you stumble upon a worn, dusty sign sitting by itself, a sign that reads simply, unlabeled. You pause. If the sign truly describes itself as unlabeled, then it has a label, and so it's lying. But if it doesn't have a label, then the word unlabeled is somehow accurate, but also isn't. In a flash, you realize, in this strange land, not everything can be neatly sorted. Some ideas tear holes straight through the rules meant to govern them. Now think bigger. What if our entire understanding of reality is built like that, on systems that work brilliantly until suddenly a corner folds in on itself? What if no map can ever fully capture the territory, No description can fully capture reality, because the tools we use, language, logic, thought, are themselves part of the territory, tangled in its twists and contradictions. Maybe at the heart of things, there's a truth so wild, so self-referential, so untamable, that every time we try to grab it, it simply steps sideways, smiling, and points us back to our own assumptions. Maybe reality isn't broken. Maybe it's just bigger than any box we can build around it. Curry's Paradox. Imagine someone walks up to you, clipboard in hand, smile too wide, and says, "Hey, I have a deal for you. All you have to do is agree to one tiny sentence, and you'll get anything you want." You laugh. It sounds like a scam, but then they show you the sentence. If this sentence is true, then you will win $1 billion. That's it. No fine print. No hidden clauses. Just that. You frown. What's the trick? But they assure you, in the pure, unbreakable world of logic, if the sentence is true, then the consequence must follow. And if the consequence follows, then you must win the $1 billion. Simple, clean, elegant. And besides, how could accepting one harmless sentence ever hurt anything? What's the worst that could happen? Let's walk through it together. First, suppose the sentence is true. If it's true, then according to the sentence itself, you win $1 billion. Great. You celebrate. You start shopping for yachts. Now suppose, just for argument's sake, that the sentence is false. If it's false, then the claim, if this sentence is true, then you win $1 billion, is not happening. But wait, in logic, a conditional statement, if P then Q, is considered true when P is false. So if the sentence were false, it would still count as logically true because the if part didn't happen, a loophole baked into logic itself. Which means the sentence is true anyway. You blink. You read the sentence again. No matter how you slice it, the sentence claims its own truth and drags the $1 billion prize into reality with it. It's like a snake eating its tail, twisting around the rules until up becomes down. But here's the terrifying part. If this trick works for you win $1 billion, then it also works for the earth explodes. You are made of cheese. Unicorns are real. Everything is both true and false at once. Anything. By simply allowing this kind of sentence to exist, you rip open a wormhole in logic, a shortcut where absolutely any statement, no matter how absurd or destructive, can be instantly proven true. You didn't just accept a harmless sentence. You accidentally gave reality a self-destruct button. And all it asked for was your agreement. At first glance, logic seems invincible. It's the bedrock of mathematics, philosophy, computer science, the very blueprint of reason itself. It's supposed to be immune to tricks, immune to flattery, immune to collapse. But Curry's paradox cracked that illusion. The betrayal comes from the very rules that logic proudly teaches us. If a statement says, if this sentence is true, then X is true. And if logic insists that either X must happen or the sentence must be false, then by the clever loop, X must happen, because even if you deny it, logic still folds around and demands it. The structure of logic cannot tell the difference between an honest chain of reasoning and a snake that eats its own tail. It simply follows the rules, blindly, mechanically, even if those rules walk straight off a cliff. In Curry's paradox, truth becomes a vending machine. Insert the right self-referential sentence, and you can buy anything you want, no work required. Want $1 billion? Want to prove the moon is made of pickles? Want a decree that everything that can be imagined must immediately be real? Curry's paradox whispers, if you just accept the setup, you must accept the reward. It's the ultimate betrayal. Reason itself turning into pure chaos because it was following the rules too perfectly. The nightmare isn't that logic was broken by an outside force. The nightmare is that logic broke itself. When Curry's paradox was first recognized, building off the ruins already left by Russell's paradox, the intellectual world flinched. In the early 20th century, mathematics was still reeling from shocks. They were trying to rebuild, trying to make set theory, logic, and proofs perfectly safe, like fortresses against absurdity. And then Curry came along and casually dropped a grenade in the middle of the rebuilding effort. Here was the horror. Curry's paradox didn't need sets. Curry's paradox didn't need tricky infinite collections. Curry's paradox could exist anywhere self-reference and implication were allowed, even inside your most careful, polished systems. You couldn't just ban the paradox easily. You couldn't just redefine a few things and pretend it went away. It lived inside the bloodstream of logic itself. The reactions were immediate and stark. Mathematicians like Alonzo Church and Haskell Curry, whom the paradox is named after, wrestled with formal systems, realizing how fragile they really were. Logicians who had championed systems like lambda calculus and combinatory logic, elegant tools meant to formalize math and computation, now had to admit that lurking in their beautiful frameworks was the possibility of instant, total collapse. New rules and limitations had to be invented. Ways to block or cage self-reference, ways to neuter implication, ways to protect reason from devouring itself. Entire branches of logic, like type theory, intuitionistic logic, and par-consistent logic, rose from the ashes, desperate attempts to patch the hole that Curry's paradox had punched straight through the heart of reason. The dream of pure, flawless logic? It died a little that day, and in its place, a colder, harder truth set in. Even the cleanest systems, built with the sharpest minds, can unknowingly carry the seeds of their own destruction. At first, Curry's paradox seemed like an isolated infection, a strange glitch in the dusty corners of pure logic. But the more people stared at it, the more horrifying the realization became. The wound was not isolated. It was systemic, because the paradox doesn't rely on anything exotic. No strange infinities, no exotic mathematics, no wild philosophical assumptions. All it needs is implication and self-reference. Two features built into almost every system we use to understand the world. Formal mathematics, vulnerable. Computer programming languages, vulnerable. Artificial intelligence models that rely on formal reasoning, vulnerable. Any structure that allows statements to reference themselves and make conditional claims, vulnerable. And so the cracks began to spread. In mathematics, it became clear that the foundations could not be naive. You couldn't just build math on obvious truths. You needed layers of defense, type hierarchies, restrictions on statements, fortified walls against certain kinds of self-reference. In logic, it became clear that classical reasoning alone was too blunt. New, more cautious systems like intuitionistic logic and par-consistent logic rose. Systems where contradictions didn't immediately explode into total nonsense, where implication had to earn its keep. In computer science, designers realized that programming languages, too, had to be carefully constructed to avoid logical bombs hidden in recursion and references. Entire fields like type theory evolved to protect computation from paradoxical implosions. And in philosophy, a deeper question arose. If language itself can fold into paradox so easily, how much of what we know is just a polite fiction, a tightrope walk over an abyss? The wound was not on the surface. It was in the marrow. And the terrifying conclusion was this. Whenever a system grows powerful enough to express truths about itself, it also grows powerful enough to destroy itself. Curry's paradox offers a chilling lesson, but one that's strangely beautiful too. It shows us that power and vulnerability are inseparable. The more expressive a system is, the more it can talk about itself, reason about itself, promise things to itself, the more cracks it opens up inside its own walls. The more a mind understands itself, the more it risks unraveling its own certainties. The more a civilization relies on logic, computation, and language to master reality, the more it quietly balances on the edge of paradox. It's not a flaw. It's not a mistake. It's the price of power, because true understanding isn't safe. It doesn't come with guarantees, and the tools sharp enough to build entire worlds are also sharp enough to shred them. Maybe in the end, paradoxes like Curry's aren't errors at all. Maybe they are the unavoidable side effects of any mind, any system, that tries to hold a mirror to itself. And standing in front of that mirror, we have to ask, can we live with the fact that the smarter we become, the closer we sail to the edge of madness? Maybe that's the real paradox. The more we know, the more fragile everything becomes. Yablo's Paradox. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast cliff, peering into an abyss where the ground seems to go on forever. You can't see the bottom, and the farther you look, the more you realize that the fall might never end. It's disorienting, almost ungraspable. Now picture that feeling, but in the realm of logic. You don't have to fall off a cliff, but suddenly, every piece of reasoning you trust starts to bend and twist into something infinitely complex, just beyond your grasp. This is Yablo's paradox, a paradox that, at first glance, sounds harmless. But the deeper you look, the more it challenges everything you know about truth, logic, and infinity itself. At first, it seems like a riddle, but the moment you try to untangle it, reality itself starts to buckle under the weight of its own contradictions. What if truth in its purest form doesn't actually exist within a single statement, but in an endless, looping series of statements that can never resolve themselves? So what is this paradox, really? Let's start by breaking it down, step by step, so you can see the dangerous simplicity of it. Yablo's paradox is a seemingly simple sequence of statements, but with an infinite, self-referential twist. Here's how it works. Imagine an infinite chain of sentences, each one saying something about the next one. Sentence 1 says, sentence 2 is false. Sentence 2 says, sentence 3 is false. Sentence 3 says, sentence 4 is false. And so on forever. Each sentence makes a claim about the next one, but here's the catch. None of them directly contradict themselves, and they don't rely on each other's truth value in the way you might expect. Let's take a moment to grasp this. Sentence 1 is telling you that sentence 2 is false, but sentence 2 is telling you that sentence 3 is false. Sentence 3 says that sentence 4 is false, and the chain continues without end. At first, this might seem like a harmless loop, but here's where it gets weird. You can never figure out the truth of any sentence because every sentence depends on the truth of the next, creating an infinite regress. No matter how far you go down the chain, you cannot arrive at a definitive answer. It's like looking at a row of mirrors facing each other. Each reflection shows you the next, but none of them offer a complete image. Now, imagine that you're trying to determine whether one of these sentences is true or false. If you say sentence 1 is true, you're immediately committing to saying sentence 2 is false. But then you need to know if sentence 2 is actually false, which leads you to the same problem again. You're stuck in a loop of infinite dependency with no clear resolution. This is where the paradox gets its punch. The series doesn't self-correct, and it doesn't close the loop in the way that paradoxes like the liar paradox, where a sentence says, I am lying, do. Instead, Yablo's paradox presents a chain that spirals out into infinity, each sentence relying on the next, creating a situation where truth becomes elusive and indefinite. Here's a truth that seems simple but is infinitely complex. There is no final answer. The paradox never resolves because each sentence is forever dependent on the truth of another. It's like a never-ending game where you can't ever reach the finish line. Now, here's where the real twist lies. Yablo's paradox isn't just some trick of words or a quirky logical puzzle. It breaks traditional logic in a way that's both subtle and profound. Think about the structure of most logical systems. In classical logic, we work with statements that are either true or false. There's a clear-cut binary choice. A statement is either true or false. This is what gives logic its power. It offers a consistent framework where we can determine the truth of propositions. It's a tool we use in everything from philosophy to mathematics to programming. But in Yablo's paradox, this framework fails. Imagine this. Instead of having individual, self-contained propositions that are either true or false, we have a chain of interconnected statements. Each one is dependent on the next, creating a structure that doesn't collapse neatly into a simple binary truth. Here's where traditional logic starts to bend. In classical logic, when you face a contradiction, it's often easy to spot the problem. Something either fits or it doesn't. But in this paradox, the contradiction doesn't exist in any one statement. It's embedded in the infinite sequence itself. There's no clear-cut truth, no isolated statement that's obviously false or true, because every statement depends on the next one, creating an endless loop of uncertainty. For example, if you say sentence 1 is true, you immediately fall into the trap of defining the truth of sentence 2. But once you try to validate sentence 2, you're led to sentence 3, and the cycle continues. There's no clean place to anchor your logic. So, in traditional logic, you'd expect contradictions to appear when a single statement is false or true in a way that disrupts the system. But in this paradox, the contradiction emerges not from a single statement, but from the infinite chain itself. This creates an endless game of chasing your tail. The truth of one statement depends on the next, but there's no way to definitively determine the truth of any of them. Logic becomes a moving target, a target that constantly shifts with no hope of being hit. This, in essence, is how Yablo's paradox breaks logic. It exposes a hidden flaw in our most fundamental assumptions. The paradox makes it clear that truth is not always straightforward, and that some systems, like infinite chains of dependent statements, are inherently unresolvable. The contradiction doesn't arise where you'd expect it to. Instead, it lives in the structure itself. This is why Yablo's paradox is such a profound puzzle. It suggests that truth itself may be far more complicated than we realize, and that logic, in its traditional form, isn't always up to the task of solving every puzzle. The paradox exposes the limits of classical logic and asks us to reconsider how we approach truth. The implications of Yablo's paradox reach far beyond a simple trick of language. It's a challenge to the very foundations of logic, and it has deep consequences in fields that shape our understanding of the world: mathematics, philosophy, and even computer science. First, let's look at the impact on mathematics. Mathematicians rely on logical systems to build proofs and structure theorems. But Yablo's paradox throws a wrench in this process. If truth can't be determined in an infinite chain of logical dependencies, what does that mean for the way we approach infinite series or recursive functions in mathematics? Mathematicians are no strangers to infinite series and recursion, but Yablo's paradox shows how even familiar, seemingly stable concepts can unravel under the right conditions. It forces mathematicians to reconsider the nature of infinity and whether certain methods of proof are even valid in the face of infinite regress. The paradox also has significant philosophical consequences. Philosophy has long grappled with the nature of truth. Is truth absolute? Is it determined by individual statements? Or is it something more fluid, dependent on context and relationships? Yablo's paradox suggests that truth may not be as self-contained as we once thought. In fact, truth might not exist in isolation at all. It's not just about individual statements, but about the larger web of relationships between them. This shifts our philosophical perspective from truth as a fixed point to truth as an interconnected network, where understanding comes not from isolated statements, but from the entire structure they form. And then there's computer science. The world of algorithms and machine learning is built on the assumption that we can rely on logical, binary decisions. A statement is true or it's false. But when you introduce an infinite series of dependencies like those in Yablo's paradox, it raises questions about how we approach algorithms that rely on recursive functions, such as certain search algorithms or decision-making processes in AI. If a machine is trying to solve a problem that requires navigating an infinite loop of dependencies, can it ever reach a resolution? Yablo's paradox suggests that some kinds of problems may be unsolvable, no matter how much data you feed into a system. This paradox also touches on ethics and identity. If truth is not a fixed, self-contained entity, how do we navigate the moral and ethical questions we face every day? Ethics often operates on established truths, right or wrong, good or bad. But if those truths are contingent upon an endless series of relational statements, can we ever really be sure of what is right or wrong? And what about identity? If our sense of self is built on an infinite chain of experiences and dependencies, how solid is the foundation of who we think we are? Are we forever dependent on the sequence of events that came before us, without the ability to stand on our own? Ultimately, Yablo's paradox shows us the fragility of our logical systems. It highlights how something as foundational as truth, something we often take for granted, can become infinitely elusive when we dig just a little bit deeper. This paradox forces us to confront the limitations of the very tools we use to understand the world around us. As we step back from Yablo's paradox, we are left with more than just a mind-bending riddle. We find ourselves staring into the void of uncertainty, a reminder that the world of truth, logic, and knowledge is not as neatly ordered as we'd like to believe. In many ways, the paradox reveals the limits of our intellectual frameworks, the edges where even the most carefully constructed systems begin to crumble. But here's the deeper question we're left with. What does this say about how we understand truth? We often imagine truth as something stable, something we can hold in our hands, an immutable fact that we can point to with certainty. Whether it's the number of planets in the solar system or the basic rules of arithmetic, truth seems like something we can arrive at through logic, reason, and evidence. We like to think we can draw clear lines around what's true and false. But Yablo's paradox, in its quiet defiance, says, maybe truth is not so simple. Maybe, just maybe, it is woven into a larger web, so complex and interconnected that trying to pin it down results in a paradox of our own making. The paradox forces us to confront the unsettling possibility that some truths might be fundamentally elusive, not because we are incapable of grasping them, but because they exist in a space where the rules of logic themselves break down. It's not just an academic problem. This idea spills into real life. In our relationships, our understanding of the world, and even our own identities, we are constantly constructing webs of meaning. And those webs are often impossible to reduce to simple yes or no answers. Think about the way you experience your own life. We are, each of us, a series of interdependent experiences, memories, and choices. Much like the paradox, our identities depend on a sequence of events that extend endlessly backward into our past, without a clear beginning or end. Are we the sum of these experiences, or are we something more? This brings us to a final thought. How many of the questions we ask are simply questions we weren't meant to answer? What if there are limits to knowledge that we can never transcend? What if some truths are forever unreachable, existing not as final destinations, but as pathways that only lead to more questions? When faced with paradoxes like Yablo's, we can try to dig deeper, to analyze, and to solve. But sometimes, the real lesson is not in finding the answer. Sometimes, the real answer is that the search itself may be the most important thing. The pursuit of knowledge, the questioning of assumptions, and the willingness to accept that some mysteries will remain unsolved may be what keeps our minds sharp and our understanding evolving. So, here's the provocative question I'll leave you with. What if some paradoxes are not meant to be solved, but to change the way we think? Perhaps the paradox isn't a flaw in our understanding of logic. Maybe it's a revelation, a reminder that the quest for truth, however elusive, is what shapes our minds, our systems, and even our identities. Pinocchio Paradox. Once upon a time, but not so long ago that it feels like fiction, there was a wooden boy named Pinocchio. His creator, Geppetto, crafted him from love and longing, and in return, the universe gifted him with a simple, brutal rule. Whenever Pinocchio lied, his nose would grow. It was an elegant kind of justice, simple enough for a child to understand. Lie, and the world itself would betray you. Tell the truth, and you remained untouched. A perfect, visible morality. Or so it seemed. Everyone who heard the story took the magic at face value. It was neat. It was moral. It made the world seem like a place where lies were punished instantly and truth was clear and obvious. But that illusion rests on one terrifying assumption. What happens when the rule itself gets tangled? What happens when the liar and the magic that punishes lying collide in a perfect contradiction? Today, we crack open that little fairy tale, and inside, find a trap that could undo logic itself. It starts not with a grand lie or a wicked heart, but with a simple sentence. A boy standing in front of you, saying something so innocent and yet so cursed that it makes reality itself freeze in place. Imagine it. Pinocchio looks up at you, eyes wide and sincere, and says, "My nose will grow now." It sounds harmless, a prediction, a child's guess. But the moment those words leave his lips, the world behind them begins to tremble. Because now, what should happen? Think carefully. If Pinocchio is telling the truth, then his nose should not grow, right? After all, his nose grows only when he lies. If he's telling the truth, there's no lie, no growth. But if his nose does not grow, then he was lying. His statement was false, and thus, by the magic rule, his nose should grow. But if it grows, that makes his statement true again. And if it's true, it shouldn't grow. But if it doesn't grow, it's a lie, and it must grow. Round and round, a snake eating its own tail. The simple cause and effect spell, the thing that made Pinocchio's world seem so clear, short circuits. Reality starts spinning, chasing itself, unable to decide. Grow or not grow, truth or lie, being or not being. In that moment, the magic freezes. Not just confused, broken. Because the system was built for simple lies and simple truths. It was never designed for self-reference, for statements that loop back on themselves and pull the rug out from under reality. Pinocchio, with a single sentence, had found the crack in his world's foundation. The boy who couldn't lie, or tell the truth without consequence, had stumbled upon the very boundary between language and existence. And now, the entire fairy tale universe was caught, suspended, in an endless paradox. Let's pull back the curtain even further. What makes Pinocchio's sentence different from an ordinary lie, or an ordinary truth, is that it eats itself. It is self-referential. It talks about its own truth value. This isn't just a quirk of fairy tale magic. It's a deep fracture line in logic itself. Pinocchio says, "My nose will grow now." That statement predicts an event, nose growth, that by the rules should only happen if he's lying. But the statement's truthfulness depends on what happens next. And what happens next depends on whether the statement is true. It's a feedback loop, a closed circuit with no escape hatch. You can't settle it by waiting to see what his nose does, because whatever it does immediately contradicts the reason it should happen in the first place. If the nose grows, it means he lied. But that makes the statement true, which means he didn't lie. If the nose doesn't grow, it means he told the truth. But that makes the statement false, so his nose should have grown. In technical terms, this is what's called a liar paradox, a special breed of logical impossibility where a statement undermines itself. Pinocchio's innocent phrase becomes a logical singularity, a place where the usual rules of truth and falsehood collapse into an infinite spin, like a black hole of meaning. No lie, no truth, no stability, just a mind stuck forever chasing itself in circles. It's a little frightening, isn't it? That a single line of simple, clear language can crack the whole foundation of how reality decides what's real. And it gets worse, because Pinocchio's magic rule, the rule meant to keep things simple, to punish lies and reward truth, makes the paradox even more vicious. Now, it's not just words that contradict themselves, it's physical reality caught in the loop. The universe must either betray its own laws or freeze, paralyzed by contradiction. It might seem like a fun little mind game, a hiccup in a children's story, but this paradox punches far above its weight class. The Pinocchio Paradox, first proposed by Veronique Eldridge-Smith in 2001, was not born out of thin air. It stands in the long shadow of a lineage of paradoxes reaching back over 2,000 years. In ancient Greece, the philosopher Eubulides posed the classic liar paradox. This sentence is false, a sentence that cannot consistently be true or false. Later, in the 20th century, Kurt Gödel showed that even the most powerful mathematical systems could be toppled by self-referential statements, proving that within any rich enough system, there will always be truths that can't be proven. In computer science, Alan Turing showed that certain problems could never be solved by any machine, no matter how powerful, because they fell into the same trap of self-reference and undecidability. Pinocchio's paradox is their fairy tale heir. It reveals a devastating truth. Whenever a system tries to govern itself by its own rules, whether it's logic, mathematics, law, language, or even the magic of a wooden boy, it risks tying itself into a knot it cannot untangle. Self-reference is both a tool of immense power and a trapdoor into madness. And Pinocchio, with his simple, "my nose will grow now," steps neatly into the middle of this ancient battlefield. A puppet caught between honesty and lies, dangling not by strings, but by the very failure of logic itself. You might think, well, that's cute, a fairy tale glitch. But it's just a story, right? Wrong. The Pinocchio Paradox, like all liar paradoxes, echoes far beyond the pages of children's books. Everywhere human beings build systems of truth, the ghost of Pinocchio's nose lurks just out of sight. Artificial intelligence. Modern AI systems, especially those trying to understand language, face this problem constantly. How do you teach a machine to distinguish true from false when language itself can loop back and bite its own tail? Give an AI a sentence like, "This statement will cause an error," and you're basically handing it a logical grenade. Legal systems. Laws often rely on self-reference, statutes that govern how other laws are applied. If a law says, "Any law that contradicts this law is invalid," what happens if it contradicts itself? Courts sometimes face Pinocchio-like nightmares where interpreting one rule crashes the whole system into incoherence. Ethics and identity. Who are we, if not the stories we tell ourselves? But what happens if those stories refer back on themselves? I am the kind of person who questions everything I am. Self-reference isn't just logical, it's deeply personal, entwined in how we define morality, responsibility, even the concept of a self. Mathematics and foundations of logic. Gödel proved that even the dream of a complete, consistent set of mathematical truths is a fantasy. At some point, in any rich system, you'll find statements that cannot be settled, true and untrue, forever balancing on the knife's edge. Pinocchio's innocent little prediction opens a doorway into the deep, endless fragility of all structures built on language and rules. It's a reminder, even in our most careful creations, laws, algorithms, philosophies, there's always a small, stubborn possibility of self-destruction, hiding in plain sight. And that's not child's play. That's the real fabric of reality pulling apart at the seams. At the heart of the Pinocchio Paradox is something painfully human. Our desperate wish that truth could be simple, that lies would grow noses, that honesty would be rewarded, that language could cleanly carve the world into what is and what isn't. But the deeper truth is harsher and strangely beautiful. Language is a mirror that can shatter. Truth is a dance, not a destination. And even fairy tales, perhaps especially fairy tales, are built on foundations riddled with cracks. Pinocchio, the wooden boy who only wanted to be real, shows us something profound. To become fully real, to grow up into the messy, magnificent reality of existence, means embracing contradictions we can never fully resolve. Maybe truth isn't about certainty. Maybe it's about the courage to keep speaking, even when the ground under your words is shifting. So next time you hear someone tell a simple story about what's true and what's false, remember Pinocchio, and listen very carefully for the tiny creaking sound of a nose that might or might not be about to grow. The Ship of Theseus. A soft orange sun sinks behind the marble columns of ancient Athens. The harbor buzzes with life, fishermen hauling in their catches, merchants shouting over one another, and standing proudly among it all, gleaming in the golden light, is the Ship of Theseus. This ship wasn't just any vessel. It was a symbol of heroism, pride, and memory, commemorating the legendary Theseus, who once slew the Minotaur and navigated the labyrinth. Year after year, the Athenians maintained the ship with great devotion. Whenever a plank cracked, it was lovingly replaced. When the sails grew ragged, they were carefully rewoven. When the mast aged and weakened, a new one was raised in its place. But as the centuries stretched on, a strange reality began to unfold. Not a single original part remained. Every piece had been swapped out, one careful repair at a time. And that simple ritual gave birth to a question so explosive that it shattered the calm waters of philosophy forever. If you replace every part of a ship, is it still the same ship? It sounds like an idle thought at first, a child's wonder. But pull at it just a little, and it unravels everything you believe about identity, continuity, and even the self. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. Suppose someone secretly gathered all the discarded planks, sails, and ropes, and rebuilt another ship of Theseus. Which one is the real one now? The one that evolved, or the one that preserved? By the end of this journey, you might find yourself not just doubting the ship, but doubting everything you think you know about yourself. Let's crack open the mystery, piece by piece. At the heart of the Ship of Theseus is a deceptively simple idea: identity versus change. What truly makes something what it is? Is it the materials it's made from? The form it takes? The function it serves? The story we tell about it? The paradox invites us into a dizzying thought experiment. If the Ship of Theseus slowly replaced every plank over time, at what exact moment does it stop being the original ship? Is there even such a moment? It's not just about ships. Think about your own body. Over the years, your cells die and are replaced. Your memories shift. Your beliefs evolve. Are you still the same person you were 10 years ago? Or take a city. Buildings rise and fall. Populations change. Cultures evolve. Is it still the same city your ancestors lived in? The ancient philosopher Plutarch first recorded the Ship of Theseus story. Later, philosophers like Thomas Hobbes expanded the riddle even further, asking, what if all the discarded parts were collected and reassembled, plank by plank, into a second ship? If both the continually repaired ship and the reassembled ship claim to be the real Ship of Theseus, who's telling the truth? Or worse, what if both are wrong? It refuses to be solved because it strikes at a nerve modern logic still struggles to touch. The terrifying possibility that identity, something we rely on for meaning, is not a solid object, but a fragile illusion. An illusion we must either embrace, or forever chase, plank by disappearing plank. Now imagine the final twist in the Ship of Theseus story. The moment where the paradox tears itself wide open. Picture it. In a hidden dockyard, craftsmen have been quietly gathering every discarded plank, every weathered nail, every frayed rope removed from the original ship over the decades. Piece by piece, they reconstruct a second Ship of Theseus, painstakingly, faithfully, perfectly. One morning, the harbor awakes to find two gleaming ships floating side by side. Both look identical. Both claim the same heritage. Both whisper the same history of brave Theseus and the labyrinth. Which one is real? Is it the ship that evolved, maintained across generations, its parts renewed but its spirit preserved? Or is it the ship that preserved the original materials, painstakingly stitched back together, plank by ancient plank? And this is where the paradox deepens, what if neither ship is truly Theseus? What if the very act of replacement or reconstruction has destroyed the original identity forever? What if Theseus' ship only existed in a fleeting moment, now lost to the tides of time? This is the double betrayal hidden inside the paradox. First betrayal. Continuity cannot save identity, because if everything changes, what was it anchored to? Second betrayal. Preservation cannot save identity either, because reassembling old pieces is not the same as preserving the living whole. It's like trying to hold onto a river by clutching at the water, or trying to bottle a song by catching the notes in your hand. No matter which ship you point to, something essential, the living pulse of the real Ship of Theseus, has slipped away. And here's the most unsettling part. This isn't just a riddle about wood and nails. It's a mirror, and what it reflects is us. The paradox doesn't stop at ancient ships or dusty thought experiments. It spills into the most personal parts of our lives, into the very question of who we are. You, right now, are not the same person you were 5, 10, 20 years ago. Your body has changed. Most of the cells you had are long gone. Your memories have faded, shifted, or even distorted. Your dreams, values, fears, they've evolved too. So ask yourself, are you still you? Is identity something fixed, like a sacred, unchangeable core? Or is it something that emerges from the ever-changing river of your experiences? And what about society? What about nations, traditions, cultures? When everything about them, people, beliefs, borders, change over time, can they still claim to be the same? The Ship of Theseus cuts across philosophy, psychology, ethics, law, and even technology. In medicine, when organ transplants and prosthetics replace half a person's body, are they still the same individual in the eyes of law and society? In artificial intelligence, if you slowly upgrade a machine with newer and newer parts until nothing original remains, is it still the same AI? In personal relationships, when two people grow and change beyond recognition over the years, are they still the same us they once were? The paradox plants a slow, troubling thought. Maybe there's no sharp line between what is and what was. Maybe identity isn't a fact you can point at. Maybe it's a story, a fragile story we tell ourselves to stitch the ever-changing pieces into something that feels whole. A story that can be beautiful, but also a story that can be broken. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The question, then, is not what we are. It's how we choose to remember ourselves, before time, change, and tide carry us, piece by piece, beyond the edge of the known map. Stand back for a moment. Look again, not at the Ship of Theseus, but at yourself, at your own life. Every year, every day, every breath, a plank swapped, a nail loosened, a sail mended. Childhood slips away. Old dreams splinter and fall. New hopes are hoisted like fresh sails. Piece by piece, you are rebuilt. Piece by piece, you leave parts of yourself behind. And yet, you sail forward, across the endless ocean of time, claiming the name you were given at birth. But are you still the same ship? Or are you something new pretending to remember an old journey? Maybe we are all like Theseus' ship, drifting through the ages, not anchored by our materials, not even anchored by our memories, but by something more elusive, a story. A story that we are still us, despite the transformations. A story that stitches the past and the present together, even as the seams fray and the colors fade. A story powerful enough to weather the storms of change, yet fragile enough to vanish if we stop telling it. And maybe, just maybe, the true answer to the Ship of Theseus isn't found in logic or strict identity. Maybe the answer is an act of faith, a choice, to see continuity where there is none, to believe in a self that is constantly slipping away and being born again. We are not just bodies, not just minds, not just memories. We are the captains of ships that are always falling apart and always being rebuilt. Every moment, every choice, every heartbeat, another nail, another plank, sailing forward into a sea of uncertainty. Never fully the same, never fully different, always becoming. And if that's true, if life itself is a Ship of Theseus, then maybe the real question isn't what we are. Maybe it's how we sail, with courage, with curiosity, with the deep human hope that even if everything changes, somehow, something of us remains. A single name painted on the prow, a single story whispered across the waves. Still sailing, still becoming, always ours. The Grandfather Paradox. Imagine standing on a rainy street at midnight. In your hand, a loaded revolver. In front of you, a man you've never met, but somehow you know exactly who he is. Your grandfather. He hasn't yet met your grandmother, hasn't yet started the chain of events that would lead to you. You raise the gun. One action, one squeeze of the trigger, and you could wipe your entire existence clean from the timeline. Would you do it? Would you dare? That, in essence, is the chilling heart of the grandfather paradox, one of the most mind-warping riddles in all of philosophy and physics. It doesn't just ask what would happen if you traveled through time. It forces you to confront a more horrifying question. What if time doesn't forgive mistakes? What if one wrong move could snap the chain of cause and effect, and make you, and everything you ever touched, disappear like smoke? Welcome to a paradox so severe, it makes reality itself tremble. Are you ready to see how deep the fracture runs? Let's slow it down. Imagine you invent a time machine. Not some clunky sci-fi contraption with blinking lights, but something sleek, smooth, surgically precise. You step inside. You dial back the years. 70 years. 80 years. Back before your parents were even born. You find your young grandfather, a man still wild, reckless, unaware of the family tree that will someday sprout from his choices. And through accident or design, you cause his death. Maybe it's a tragic stumble. Maybe it's something darker. Either way, your grandfather is gone, before he ever meets your grandmother. Simple cause and effect, right? But here's the problem. If your grandfather never meets your grandmother, your parent is never born. If your parent is never born, you are never born. If you are never born, you never invent the time machine. And if you never invent the time machine, you never travel back to kill your grandfather. Meaning he survives. Meaning you are born. Meaning you do invent the time machine. Meaning you do travel back. And around we spin, trapped in a logical death loop, where the past undoes the future, and the future undoes the past. Like a snake devouring its own tail. Like a gun whose bullet ricochets endlessly between the shooter and the target, erasing the moment before it ever existed. This is not just a cute sci-fi scenario. This is a direct assault on the very foundation of reality. The principle that events cause other events, that time flows forward in an unbreakable chain. The grandfather paradox tears that chain apart link by link, until nothing is left but a question. Can reality survive a contradiction? And if it can't, what happens next? To truly grasp the grandfather paradox, you need to realize the sheer scale of what's at stake. This is no ordinary riddle, no simple question of what happens if we break a rule. It's a fundamental attack on how we understand the very fabric of time. When you consider the paradox deeply, it's not just about whether you kill your grandfather. It's about what happens when cause and effect start eating each other alive. Think of the foundation of time like a domino chain. Every event in history, every decision you make, every step taken, every breath inhaled is a domino. They line up neatly, one falling after the other in a smooth, predictable cascade. But then, imagine pulling out a single domino, a pivotal one, and watching the entire sequence collapse in on itself. What happens? Nothing. The future you thought was set simply evaporates. And without that future, the past can't exist. So the domino that you pulled out, it reappears because the event that led to it never occurred. But hold on, if the event never happened, how did you pull out the domino? And if you did pull it out, what happens to all the other dominoes? It's like trying to draw a picture of a circle, but with every stroke you make, the circle twists and loops in on itself, becoming something else entirely. This isn't just a thought experiment. It's a fundamental breakdown of logical causality. The world we live in thrives on the idea that for every effect, there is a cause. If you break that chain, reality itself starts to disintegrate. And once that happens, you're left with the chilling realization. Time doesn't just flow forward. It needs structure to stay intact. Without that structure, we risk slipping into an endless paradox where events contradict one another, canceling each other out. And this leads to the deeper madness. When you pull at the threads of time, you risk unraveling everything. If the chain of cause and effect can be disrupted this easily, what does that say about the universe? What if we've been living in a reality that at any moment could flip back on itself? The paradox is maddening, but if you've spent any time reading about time travel, you'll know that thinkers have proposed several ways to stitch the wound back together. Unfortunately, none of them come without their own complications. One of the most popular fixes comes from a theory known as parallel universes, or the many worlds hypothesis. The idea is deceptively simple. Instead of assuming that one timeline exists, the one where your grandfather survives, where you're born, where the paradox erases itself, we embrace the idea that every action creates a new timeline, a new universe, a new reality. In this model, you could travel back in time, kill your grandfather, and watch the timeline fork. A new universe is born where you were never born, and your grandfather died before meeting your grandmother. But in the original universe, everything stays the same. You're still here. Time keeps flowing forward, unaffected. Sounds good, right? But there's a catch. If this is true, then every action, no matter how small, creates an endless multiverse of realities. In each one, a different version of you is making different choices, living different lives. In one universe, you never existed. In another, you might have killed your grandfather, but lived to tell the tale. In yet another, your grandfather might have survived, but you never invented the time machine. The paradox is resolved. But the cost is staggering. We're left with an infinite web of universes, where the lines between cause and effect no longer hold any meaning. There is no singular reality, no objective timeline, just countless versions of ourselves, living out different scenarios, trying to figure out which one, if any, is real. Another fix that's been suggested involves self-consistency. This is a theory proposed by physicist Igor Novikov, which suggests that no matter what you do, the timeline will adjust in such a way that no paradoxes ever arise. This could mean that if you went back in time and tried to kill your grandfather, something would prevent you from doing it. Maybe an accident would stop you, or perhaps you'd be distracted at the crucial moment. This theory hinges on the idea that time is self-regulating. It actively protects itself from logical contradictions by ensuring that the events always play out as they should, in a way that avoids the paradox. The universe doesn't just unravel when you try to make a change. It pushes back, making sure that cause and effect remain intact. Sounds like a clean solution, but it comes with a chilling implication. It suggests that free will, the very thing that allows us to make choices, might be an illusion. If the timeline prevents us from creating paradoxes, does that mean we've never had the real freedom to make choices at all? So, while these theories offer ways to patch up the paradox, they do so at a steep price. The many worlds hypothesis turns our reality into a sprawling web of infinite timelines, while self-consistency suggests that we might not actually have control over our own fate. These fixes don't resolve the paradox so much as they reframe it, offering us a different, equally unsettling way of looking at the nature of time. As time travelers, or even as mere observers, are we really free to change the course of history? Or are we forever bound by the invisible strings of a timeline that will never allow us to break its rules? The grandfather paradox teaches us a brutal lesson. No matter how many layers we add to the timeline, we might never escape the consequences of our actions. As we step away from the chaos of paradoxes and tangled timelines, a simple question remains. What does it mean to truly understand time? We've spent centuries trying to piece together the puzzle of time travel, using logic, imagination, and science. But after exploring the grandfather paradox, we come to a stark realization. Time might not be something we can ever fully master. The deeper we dive, the more elusive it becomes. In trying to solve the paradox, we've built walls of multiverses, forged rules of self-consistency, and tried to patch the fabric of reality like a broken quilt. But all we've done is expose how fragile our understanding really is. The idea that we could travel back and change a moment, to snip the thread that ties us to the past, is both mesmerizing and terrifying. We find that time is not simply a straight path we walk. It's a labyrinth where every turn could twist our destiny in ways we can't predict. The grandfather paradox isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's a mirror that reflects our own limits. As humans, we love control. We yearn to understand how time works so we can plan, anticipate, and even rewrite history. But the paradox pulls us into a deeper reflection. Can we really control time, or are we just trying to outsmart it? For all its promises, time travel seems to pull us into a web of uncertainty, where the more we try to fix the puzzle, the more complex the problem becomes. Is it possible to change the past without breaking the present? Or is the very act of trying to manipulate time itself the source of the paradox we can't escape? It's as if we're chasing something that can't be caught, running down a road that loops back in on itself, where the end never quite meets the beginning. The grandfather paradox forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe time is not something we can control, or even truly understand. And as we stand on the edge of this infinite web of possibilities, we're left wondering, are we merely passengers in the flow of time, or is there a deeper pattern at play? One that we can never fully decode. The grandfather paradox will remain, like a riddle we'll never fully answer. Perhaps the answer isn't in fixing the paradox, but in accepting it, acknowledging the mystery and the beauty of time's enigma, even as we attempt to navigate its twisting corridors. Time, it seems, may not be a puzzle we can solve, but it is a journey we're all on, whether we like it or not. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. The Bootstrap Paradox. Imagine holding a battered, yellowed manuscript in your hands. You open it, flipping through the pages filled with brilliant ideas that revolutionized the world. Now, picture yourself stepping into a time machine, traveling centuries into the past, and handing that same manuscript to a young, unknown thinker who would later be celebrated as its author. Here's the twist. Where did the book actually come from? Today, we dive into the Bootstrap Paradox, one of the strangest and most mind-warping puzzles in physics and philosophy. A paradox where cause and effect coil into a snake eating its own tail. It sounds like a riddle, sure, but the deeper you dive, the more you realize this isn't just a playful thought experiment. It's a serious crack in the way we understand reality, identity, and time itself. Try to solve it by the end of this journey, if you dare. The Bootstrap Paradox starts with an elegant but unsettling question. Can something exist without ever being created? Here's a classic version. Suppose a scientist builds a time machine. Curious, she decides to travel back 200 years, bringing along a rare piece of technology, a violin, say. She gives the violin to a struggling musician in the 1700s, inspiring him to build the very first instrument of its kind. Over centuries, this violin is preserved, passed from hand to hand, until eventually it ends up in the hands of the scientist in her own time, ready for her trip to the past. So who invented the violin? In this loop, there is no clear beginning. The violin exists because it was given to the musician, but the musician only made it because he was given it. It's as if the object bootstraps itself into existence, pulling itself up by its own non-existent laces, needing no original creator. And this isn't just hypothetical sci-fi. In physics, the Bootstrap Paradox pokes holes in how we think about causality, the rule that says every effect must have a cause. If objects, information, or even people can exist without an origin point, the entire structure of cause and effect we rely on could crumble. The term bootstrap is borrowed from the old saying, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. Doing something impossible, like lifting yourself off the ground without any outside help. The paradox suggests that in the wild world of time travel, reality might be able to do just that, sustain itself, without a clear beginning or end. It's a circle without a start line, a river without a spring, a book without an author. And if that's possible, what else about reality isn't what it seems? The seeds of the Bootstrap Paradox were planted long before time machines ever appeared in science fiction. Philosophers and thinkers have long wrestled with questions about causality and infinite loops. But the idea truly took root in the 20th century, when our understanding of time itself began to shift from a steady, one-way march to something far stranger and more flexible. The name Bootstrap Paradox gained popularity thanks to the mid-century boom of science fiction writers like Robert A. Heinlein. In his 1941 short story By His Bootstraps, Heinlein masterfully crafted a narrative where a man is pulled through time, influencing events that ultimately cause his own trip back, essentially becoming his own puppet master. Heinlein didn't just write a clever time travel tale. He exposed a deep and troubling question. What happens when the origin of an event or object is swallowed by its own consequences? Meanwhile, in the world of physics, serious minds were entertaining similar nightmares. When Einstein's theory of relativity opened the door to the theoretical possibility of closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves, the Bootstrap Paradox wasn't just the domain of novelists anymore. It became a legitimate scientific headache. In a closed time-like curve, particles or people might loop through history, existing without any clear origin. The famous physicist Kip Thorne and others even proposed scenarios where information, like the blueprints for a time machine, could exist in a causality loop, received from the future and used to build the device that made the journey possible in the first place. The question isn't just, could this happen? It's if it did happen, where did the information, object, or person truly begin. The Bootstrap Paradox didn't come from a single mind. It emerged organically, like a self-sustaining idea, appropriate, perhaps, for a problem that seems to exist without an author at all. The Bootstrap Paradox doesn't just mess with science fiction. It strikes at the heart of the foundations we stand on: logic, physics, identity, even our sense of personal responsibility. First, it challenges causality, the sacred law that every effect must have a cause. If an object, an idea, or even a person can exist without ever being created by anything else, causality crumbles. Without causality, the universe doesn't unfold like a line of dominoes. It tangles into a messy web where events might have no beginning, no explanation, and no external source. Second, it rattles physics. In theories involving wormholes or closed time-like curves, the Bootstrap Paradox is a ghost lurking in the equations. If you could send something or someone into the past, you could, in theory, create an endless feedback loop. But would this violate the laws of energy conservation? Would it break the rules of quantum mechanics? Physicists like Stephen Hawking suggested chronology protection, some natural law that would prevent time paradoxes. But so far, no definitive safeguard has been found. In other words, reality might allow it. Third, it disrupts identity itself. Think of a human being caught in a bootstrap loop. A baby left at a doorstep grows up, travels through time, and leaves the baby on that same doorstep. Where then did that person actually originate? Were they ever born in the traditional sense, or did they bootstrap themselves into existence? What does it even mean to have an origin? Fourth, it influences AI and information theory. If information can exist without a true author, without a source, what happens in a world driven by data and self-replicating systems? Could an AI, fed enough time and autonomy, become a bootstrap event itself, feeding its own knowledge back into its past? Could we someday face a machine that no one truly invented, because it created itself through a loop of time and innovation? Experts have attempted various patches to the paradox, like the Novikov self-consistency principle, which says that events in time travel must be self-consistent. You can't change the past, even if you travel back to it. Others argue for multiverse theories, where any paradox simply splits reality into branching timelines, neatly sidestepping the loop. But none of these fixes fully erase the profound unease at the heart of the Bootstrap Paradox. Because if anything, an object, an idea, a life, can exist without origin, then maybe everything we know about beginning and end is just a story we tell ourselves to stay sane. Maybe the universe was always its own author. As we stand at the edge of the Bootstrap Paradox, staring into the loop where cause and effect spiral into each other, one uncomfortable truth becomes clear. The paradox doesn't just question the mechanics of time, it questions the very story we tell about existence. In our everyday thinking, we crave origins. We expect every book to have an author, every invention a creator, every life a first breath. We believe in beginnings because beginnings give us a sense of control, a way to chart history, morality, meaning. But the Bootstrap Paradox dares to ask, what if there are no true beginnings? What if some things just are? And if that's possible for a violin or a book of blueprints, or even a person, could it also be true for the universe itself? What if existence didn't start with a bang or a word or a spark, but simply loops through itself, endlessly self-creating, like a story with no first page? There's a quiet terror in that thought, but also a strange kind of wonder. Maybe the universe didn't spring from nothing. Maybe it didn't need a cause or a creator. Maybe, just maybe, it's a closed loop, a timeless artifact, a bootstrap. Thinkers like Kurt Gödel, in his work on time travel within general relativity, dared to sketch models of a universe where time could bend back on itself. Others, like physicist Sean Carroll, propose cosmological models where the universe might be eternal in some form, defying our basic craving for a neat beginning. The Bootstrap Paradox leaves us with a haunting choice. Either reality is stranger than we can currently comprehend, or our deepest assumptions about time, causality, and identity were illusions all along. And so, the next time you pick up an old story, or hum a song whose origin you can't trace, or simply wonder where your own ideas come from, ask yourself, are you the author? Or are you just another echo in a loop too vast to see? Maybe the question isn't, where did it begin? Maybe the real question is, did it ever have to? Brain in a vat. You wake up. The ceiling is there, just as it always is. The air hums gently from the vents. You stretch, feel the pull of your muscles, the thud of your heart. Everything feels normal. But somewhere deep inside you, a question stirs. What if none of this is real? Not the bed, not the room, not even the body you feel stretching itself awake. What if, right now, you are nothing more than a brain, floating silently in a glass vat of strange liquids, your every sensation, every memory, every emotion carefully fed to you by a machine? You wouldn't know. You couldn't know, because the signals reaching your mind would be perfect. The sun on your skin, artificial. The smell of fresh coffee, artificial. The love in a mother's hug, artificial. Each a mere twitch of electricity on the gray folds of your mind. Today, we plunge into one of the most unnerving, reality-shattering thought experiments ever created. The brain in a vat. And before we reach the end, ask yourself, if everything you experience could be fabricated, what would it mean to call anything real? Picture this: a mad scientist operating out of some sterile underground lab. A living human brain, removed carefully from its body, placed gently into a vat of life-sustaining fluids. Tubes and electrodes snake from the brain, connecting it to a supercomputer capable of sending an endless stream of perfect sensory data. In this new life, the brain believes it is still a person. It feels warm sunlight on its face. It hears the laughter of friends. It feels fear when crossing a busy street. It tastes sweet strawberries in summer. But all of it, every single experience, is fabricated. The brain floats, still and silent, in darkness. But its mind dances in a world it believes is real. And here's the punchline. From inside the illusion, the brain could never tell that it's trapped. Because how would it? Its only access to reality is through the very senses now being controlled. If all data is manufactured, then reality becomes whatever the brain experiences, and the idea of truth itself dissolves. This is the horrifying beauty of the brain in a vat. It suggests that your trust in the world is built on nothing firmer than a series of electrical whispers. And the more you think about it, the worse it gets. Could you, right now, be a brain in a vat? Could everyone you know be fellow prisoners, living in beautifully constructed lies? If your mind rebels at the idea, that's normal. We cling to the feeling that things are real because they must be real. But the brain in a vat forces a terrifying doubt into the heart of that feeling. Maybe real is just the most convincing lie you've ever been told. Let's slow down for a moment. Forget about mad scientists and evil computers. Strip the story down to its skeleton. If all you know about the world comes through your senses, and those senses can be manipulated, then how can you ever be certain of anything outside your own mind? This isn't just science fiction. This is epistemology, the branch of philosophy that asks, what can we know? How do we know it? The brain in a vat echoes a problem much older than computers or vats or wires. Descartes, in the 17th century, asked something similar. He wondered, what if an evil demon is deceiving me, making me believe in a world that doesn't exist? He realized that he could doubt everything, his senses, his memories, even the existence of his own body. The only thing he could not doubt was the fact that he was doubting, which led him to his famous conclusion, I think, therefore I am. But notice something terrifying here. Even Descartes, I am, doesn't guarantee that the world exists. It only means that something is doing the thinking. It says nothing about whether the thinking thing is standing on real ground or floating, lost in a lie. The brain in a vat takes that old worry and pours gasoline on it. Because now, with the rise of computers and virtual realities, the idea of artificial total deception doesn't just seem philosophically possible. It seems technologically inevitable. Could we create a fake world so perfect that even the brightest minds could not tell the difference? And if so, what if we are already living in one? This is not a mere what if. It drills straight into the core of knowledge itself. If perception can be faked, if memory can be edited, if experience can be fabricated, then how can we say anything at all, is real beyond our own thoughts? The vat isn't just a prison. It's a mirror showing us how fragile our entire idea of reality might be. You might be tempted to shrug and say, okay, cool mind-bending stuff, but in everyday life, who cares? But that shrug is exactly what the paradox attacks. Because if you can't be sure you aren't a brain in a vat, then your trust in everything, science, history, relationships, morality, even yourself, rests on unproven, invisible assumptions. Here's how the real stakes unfold. In philosophy, it forces us to confront radical skepticism, the idea that knowledge about the external world might be fundamentally impossible. All of our certainty could just be wishful thinking dressed up as fact. In science and technology, as virtual reality, brain-computer interfaces, and AI simulations grow more sophisticated, we edge closer to being able to create vat-like experiences ourselves. How will we distinguish between synthetic realities and true ones? In ethics, if you are in a simulation, or worse, if others are simulations, what are your moral obligations to beings who might not be real? Does suffering still matter if it's only happening inside a program? In identity, if your memories can be manufactured, if your sense of self can be programmed, then who are you really? The brain in a vat isn't just a creepy thought. It's a ticking time bomb hidden inside every assumption you make about existence. And the worst part, there might be no way to defuse it, because any test you invent to prove reality could itself be part of the illusion. In other words, if you are trapped in the vat, the very idea of proof may no longer mean anything at all. The stakes aren't just philosophical. They're personal. The vat isn't just a scenario. It's a haunting possibility lurking behind your every breath, every choice, every belief. Are you beginning to feel the walls of the tank yet? Faced with the terror of the vat, philosophers and scientists have not sat idle. They've built clever ladders, trying to climb out of the prison, even if they're not sure the walls are real. One approach is called coherence theory. It argues that what matters isn't whether reality matches some external truth, but whether our experiences fit together in a consistent, logical way. In other words, if the world I perceive behaves predictably, and my memories, sensations, and observations all reinforce each other, maybe that's good enough. Maybe reality just is whatever forms the most coherent, livable story. But critics snap back. A perfectly coherent dream is still a dream. Consistency doesn't guarantee truth. It only guarantees the illusion is stable. Another escape attempt invokes evolutionary reliability. The argument goes like this. If our senses were so easily deceived, our ancestors would have been eaten by lions. Survival demands a reasonably accurate perception of reality. Otherwise, the species wouldn't make it. Thus, the very fact that we are here suggests our perceptions track reality well enough to matter. Yet even this is shaky ground, because evolution only guarantees survival, not truth. If believing in an illusion helped early humans survive, nature wouldn't care whether it was real. In fact, some studies hint that creatures who see simplified, distorted versions of reality often survive better than those who see it accurately. Still trapped. Then there's the boldest move of all. Maybe it doesn't matter. Some thinkers propose that, vat or no vat, real or simulated, what counts is how we experience our existence. Meaning, purpose, love, wonder, all these live inside our perception. So even if you are a brain floating in a digital fantasy, your joys and sorrows are still real to you. Reality, in this view, isn't about matching an external world. It's about living meaningfully inside whatever world you find yourself in. It's not an escape. It's a kind of peace treaty with the paradox. But even that peace is uneasy, because every now and then, when you look too closely at your reflection, you might still see the faint shimmer of the glass tank surrounding you. Here's the final punch to the gut. Maybe the question was wrong from the start. Maybe the real fear isn't that you're a brain in a vat. Maybe the real fear is this. You are. In a sense, you already live inside a vat, your skull. Your brain is already trapped inside a dark, silent box, receiving tiny electrochemical signals from your nerves, building a world entirely out of those whispers. You've never touched an object directly. You've only ever touched the idea of it, stitched together inside your mind. Your life, your history, your loves and losses, your image of yourself, all of it, constructed from signals, patterns, interpretations. You already live behind walls you cannot see. The vat isn't some hypothetical horror. It's the fundamental condition of consciousness. The nightmare is real. It always has been. But here's the strange, breathtaking beauty. Even inside this vat of flesh and thought, you have built art, music, mathematics, civilizations. You have discovered the stars without ever leaving your mind. You have touched the infinite without ever touching anything at all. Maybe that's not terrifying. Maybe that's miraculous. Maybe the question isn't, am I a brain in a vat? Maybe the better question is, given that I am, what incredible things can I still create? And maybe, just maybe, that's what being real truly means. The Sorites Paradox. It starts small, a whisper you almost miss, a single grain of sand slipping through your fingers. Imagine standing on a beach, watching a handful of sand slowly trickle from your palm. One grain falls, then another, then another. You don't notice it at first. The change is too small, too quiet to command your attention. But if you stood there long enough, letting grain after grain drift away, eventually, you would be left holding nothing. And yet, at no point could you say, "Ah, here, in this exact moment, the sand has vanished." There was no sudden collapse, no sharp transition. Just a series of tiny, almost invisible steps leading you from something to nothing. This is not just a beach day daydream. It's a crack at the heart of logic itself, a riddle that ancient philosophers whispered about, and which modern scientists and thinkers still haven't fully escaped. It's called the Sorites Paradox, and it's about how reality, your reality, might be built on foundations far softer, far blurrier than you ever dared imagine. Before we are done, you might find yourself questioning every line you've ever trusted. So I ask you, where does many become few? Where does something become nothing? And where, if anywhere, do you draw the line? Here's the Sorites Paradox laid bare. Suppose you have a heap of sand sitting before you, thousands of tiny grains piled together. Now remove a single grain. It's still a heap, right? No big deal. Remove another. Still a heap. Remove another. Still a heap. After all, how much difference can one lonely grain possibly make? But if you keep repeating this, grain after grain after grain, eventually you'll end up with one grain. And one grain is clearly not a heap. Somewhere along the way, the heap disappeared. But where exactly? At what precise moment did it stop being a heap and become just sand? You might think you can just pick a number, say, when there are only 50 grains left. But why 50? Why not 49? Or 51? Whatever number you pick, the transition feels suspiciously arbitrary. And here's the true sting. If removing one grain never seems to destroy the heapness, then removing one grain again and again should never destroy it either. Logically, if a heap survives the loss of a single grain, then it should survive every single grain being removed. But clearly, that's not what happens. This is the slippery slope hiding under everyday thinking. If small changes don't seem to matter individually, how do they add up to catastrophic changes? The Sorites Paradox forces us to stare into the unsettling fact that many of our concepts, heap, baldness, adulthood, even identity, are not built on sharp edges. They are built on sliding scales, slow dissolutions, and invisible thresholds. And the deeper you chase the question, the more the ground under your feet seems to shift and crumble, grain by grain. The Sorites Paradox isn't some modern invention from a philosophy professor trying to mess with your head. It's ancient. So ancient, in fact, that it traces back over 2,000 years to a Greek thinker named Eubulides of Miletus. Eubulides lived around the 4th century BCE, in the same intellectual ferment that birthed Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But Eubulides wasn't content with building grand systems of thought. Instead, he specialized in breaking them. He created puzzles, known as paradoxes, that revealed the cracks and contradictions hiding inside language and logic itself. One day, he asked a seemingly innocent question. If you remove a single hair from a man's head, he's still not bald. Remove another, and another, at what point does he become bald? It sounds playful, almost like a joke. But hidden inside was a serious, even dangerous idea. What if categories like bald, heap, tall, short, and even alive or dead are just illusions we invent to make a messy world seem neat? In an era that prized clear definitions and rational order, this was deeply unsettling. It suggested that the very words people trusted to describe reality might be treacherous, blurry, unstable, and impossible to pin down with precision. And despite 2,000 years of philosophical effort, despite the rise and fall of empires, the birth of science, the splitting of the atom, we still haven't found a perfect way to solve the riddle that Eubulides whispered into history. The Sorites Paradox, simple as it seems, continues to haunt the foundations of human thought. At first glance, the Sorites Paradox seems like it's just about silly things. Heaps of sand, bald heads, piles of stones. But the deeper you go, the more you realize. It's not about sand. It's about everything. Think about the way we define categories in life. When does a fetus become a person? How old must someone be before we call them an adult? At what moment does a town become a city? How many drops make a rainstorm? When does a star collapse into a black hole? In all of these cases, small, gradual changes build up, but no single change feels like the change. And yet somehow, across those many tiny steps, something fundamentally different emerges. The Sorites Paradox exposes a terrifying possibility. That many of the words, concepts, and rules we live by are based on fuzzy edges, not solid, precise truths. Law struggles with this when defining things like negligence or obscenity. Science wrestles with it when classifying species or determining thresholds in chemistry and physics. Ethics buckles under it when trying to define life, death, consent, identity. Even artificial intelligence today faces the Sorites problem. How do you train a machine to recognize faces, threats, valid information, when the borders between categories are so murky? In a world shaped by the Sorites Paradox, decisions aren't made on the basis of perfect logic. They're made by arbitrary convention, by gut feeling, by collective agreement. Reality itself, what we so often think of as solid and self-evident, begins to feel like a shifting cloud with no hard edges to grab onto. And if we can't trust where the edges are, can we trust the concepts built on top of them? Over the centuries, thinkers have tried desperately to build defenses against the slow erosion the Sorites Paradox reveals. But solving it turned out to be like trying to draw a sharp line in the sand while the wind keeps blowing. Some philosophers proposed what's called epistemicism. They argue that there is a sharp cutoff point. You just don't know exactly where it is. Maybe at 56,241 grains, it's still not a heap, but at 56,242 grains, it is. Reality, they insist, has sharp lines even if your human brain can't see them. But to many, that answer felt hollow. It replaces mystery with arbitrary declarations, and it doesn't reflect how we actually experience the world. No one feels the difference between 56,241 and 56,242 grains of sand. No one mourns the precise moment a head becomes bald. Others tried a different strategy, supervaluationism. This approach suggests that vague terms like heap don't have one clear meaning. They have many possible, acceptable interpretations. In some contexts, something counts as a heap. In others, it doesn't. Truth becomes a dance between overlapping possibilities. Still others leaned into fuzzy logic, a branch of mathematics where truth isn't just black or white, but shades of gray. Instead of saying something is 100% true or 100% false, you say it's, 73% heap and 27% not heap. A way to model a world where certainty bleeds away into gradients. And some even went radical. They argued that the Sorites Paradox proves that many concepts we rely on every day, baldness, wealth, adulthood, even moral responsibility, are broken tools, convenient lies that help us survive but have no ultimate truth behind them. Each of these solutions patches part of the ship, but none fixes the deeper unease. Because even if you invent clever systems to handle vagueness, you're still living in a universe where the foundations of meaning itself are built on shifting sands. The crumbling edge remains, and every time you try to step onto it, it gives way a little more. Hilbert's Hotel. Imagine a hotel grander than any ever built, its corridors stretching far beyond sight, its gilded chandeliers swaying gently under a ceiling so high it fades into mist. This is Hilbert's Hotel, a place not born of bricks or stone, but of pure thought. It has an infinite number of rooms. Each room is perfectly identical, a velvet bed, a polished oak desk, a key hanging from a golden hook. And tonight, as on every night, every single room is full. Not a single vacancy. Every guest is comfortably asleep. And yet, just as you walk up to the grand front desk, dripping from rain and shivering, the concierge smiles warmly and says, "Of course we have a room for you." You hesitate. How can there be space when everything is already taken? This is where reality, logic, and intuition begin to slip. Because at Hilbert's Hotel, the rules you think you know about full and empty, about possible and impossible, start to dissolve like mist under morning light. Welcome to a place where infinity is not just a number, it's a landscape. And once you step inside, you might never think about reality the same way again. Let's walk through it carefully, because at first, it sounds like nothing more than a magician's trick. In any normal hotel, if every room is full, there's no space for newcomers. But Hilbert's Hotel plays by the logic of infinity, and infinity laughs at the boundaries we're used to. Suppose you, the lone traveler, show up to check in. The hotel manager doesn't panic. Instead, he picks up the phone and calmly calls room 1. "Hello, guest in room 1? Please move to room 2. Then he calls room 2. Guest in room 2, please move to room 3. Then room 3 moves to 4, 4 moves to 5, and so on forever. Each guest moves from their room, n to room n+1. And just like that, room 1, the very first room, is empty, ready for you. It seems impossible at first. Infinite guests already inside, and yet, still space for more. But that's the strange magic of infinite sets. Shifting every guest forward by 1 doesn't run out of rooms, because there's no last room to bump into. There's always another door, another hallway, another infinity of steps ahead. The paradox doesn't stop there. Suppose not just you, but an infinite bus filled with an infinite number of new guests shows up. Now what? The manager smiles again, as if this happens every Thursday. This time, he moves every current guest from room n to room 2n. Guest 1 moves to room 2, guest 2 moves to room 4, guest 3 moves to room 6, and so on. Now all the odd-numbered rooms, room 1, room 3, room 5, and so on, are empty, infinitely many of them. Enough to fit every single new arrival from the infinite bus. In Hilbert's hotel, no matter how full it seems, there's always more room. Full, yet never truly full. Overflowing, yet endlessly spacious. At Hilbert's hotel, infinity isn't just large. It's strangely flexible, bending reality in ways that defy everything we instinctively believe about space, quantity, and logic itself. And this is only the beginning of what Hilbert's mind-bending thought experiment reveals. Once you accept that Hilbert's hotel can always make space for more, even infinitely more, a peculiar game unfolds. Suppose now that countless infinite buses arrive. Not just one bus, but an infinite convoy of buses, each carrying an infinite number of passengers. At first glance, even Hilbert's hotel seems doomed. How could a full hotel possibly accommodate an infinite parade of infinite guests? And yet, it can. The hotel manager, undaunted, pulls out a plan. A dazzling, mad, beautiful plan. Each guest already in the hotel is moved to a room whose number is now a power of 2. Guest 1 to room 2, guest 2 to room 4, guest 3 to room 8, guest 4 to room 16, and so on, doubling each time. Now all the room numbers that are not powers of 2, room 3, room 5, room 6, room 7, room 9, room 10, room 11, room 12, and infinitely more stand open. But that's not enough, because each bus holds infinitely many guests. So the manager gets even more clever. He assigns each bus a unique prime number. Bus 1 gets 3, bus 2 gets 5, bus 3 gets 7, bus 4 gets 11, and so on. Each passenger's seat number on a bus tells him to move into a room whose number is a product of that bus's prime number raised to the power of their seat number. It's a complex, mind-bending dance of prime factorizations, a choreography only infinity could love. And it works. Every new guest finds a place. Every old guest still has a room. No one is homeless. Hilbert's hotel stretches, rearranges, and folds itself around new realities. Not because it expands, but because infinity contains within it endless reconfigurations. It's not just big. It's not just endless. Infinity is deeply, profoundly weird. And Hilbert's hotel forces us to see just how strange the concept truly is, stretching logic until it hums like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. The creator of this bewildering hotel wasn't an architect or a dreamer lost in a misty fantasy. It was one of the greatest mathematicians of the early 20th century, David Hilbert. Hilbert, a man of fierce intellect and infinite curiosity, crafted the hotel as a thought experiment, a playful yet deadly serious illustration of the strange properties of infinite sets. It was the 1920s. Mathematics was undergoing a revolution. Set theory, the mathematics of collections, sizes, and infinity, was blossoming under thinkers like George Cantor, who had shown the world that not all infinities are equal. Some infinities are larger than others. But this idea was unsettling. It gnawed at the edges of human intuition. Hilbert, wanting to expose just how deeply alien the concept of infinity was to the human mind, devised the hotel as a teaching tool, a parable so strange, so uncomfortable, that it would force even the most stubborn thinker to confront how poorly our instincts handled the infinite. It was meant to feel wrong, to feel impossible. In fact, Hilbert sometimes spoke of the infinite as something not quite fit for the human mind, a concept more at home in the realm of theology and mystery than in daily reasoning. The infinite is nowhere to be found in reality, Hilbert once remarked, no matter what experiences, observations, and knowledge are appealed to. Yet here it was, lurking inside mathematics, waiting to upset everything we thought we knew about space, quantity, and possibility. Hilbert's hotel became his sharpest illustration of this strange frontier. A hotel that should not and could not exist, but in the world of pure logic and infinite imagination, did. And once you check in mentally, spiritually, intellectually, you never quite check out again. At first, Hilbert's hotel feels like a harmless bit of imaginative math, a whimsical riddle you might chuckle over and then tuck away. But the more you turn it over in your mind, the more it splinters open cracks in reality itself. Because if infinity behaves like this, what else in our world, our logic, our understanding, is quietly broken? Take quantity, for example. In our day-to-day lives, adding more people to a full house, more cars to a full parking lot, more thoughts to an overwhelmed mind, it has limits. Real, physical, absolute limits. But Hilbert's hotel laughs at limits. In its world, you can add an infinite number of guests to a full hotel, and somehow it's still full and still has room. Addition, subtraction, even multiplication, they behave strangely when infinity gets involved. The paradox doesn't stop at hotels, either. It echoes into cosmology, where theories about the size of the universe, whether it's infinite or finite, hinge on whether infinite space even makes sense. Physics, where black holes, singularities, and the Big Bang dance dangerously close to infinite densities and energies. Computer science and AI, where infinite loops and processes pose real risks in algorithmic logic. Philosophy, where questions about eternal life, eternal recurrence, and the nature of endlessness gnaw at ethics and metaphysics. If infinity leads to contradictions, if it breaks the basic rules of more and less, then maybe our entire conceptual foundation about existence needs to be re-examined. Hilbert's hotel isn't just an amusing story. It's a warning. When you invite infinity into the room, it doesn't just stay in the corner. It takes over the entire structure of thought itself, and sometimes it tears it apart. Naturally, philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists haven't just thrown up their hands and walked away. They've tried, oh, how they've tried, to cage infinity, to domesticate it, to make it behave. Some of the most important attempts include 1. Set theory hierarchies. George Cantor, the grandfather of infinity, showed that there are different sizes of infinity. The infinity of the whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, is actually smaller than the infinity of real numbers, like all the decimals between 0 and 1. This creates a hierarchy, a towering, endless ladder of infinities. In the logic of Hilbert's hotel, it's as if there are different types of hotels, some so large that even Hilbert's original hotel would seem like a tiny roadside motel in comparison. 2. Cardinality and countability. Mathematicians developed rigorous language, like countably infinite and uncountably infinite, to try to tame the chaos. Hilbert's hotel deals with countable infinity, where even if there's no end, you can still label and match each guest and room with numbers. But once you step into uncountable infinities, the logic gets even more alien. 3. Philosophical retreats. Some philosophers have proposed that actual infinities don't exist in the real world. They're just useful fictional tools. Infinity exists on paper, in abstract thought, but not in the cosmos or in the bones of reality. 4. Alternative mathematical frameworks. In certain branches of mathematics, like constructivism and intuitionism, infinity is treated much more cautiously. You can talk about potential infinity, something growing without bound, but deny that completed infinities, like Hilbert's hotel, can exist at all. Each approach is a brave attempt to stitch up the cracks that Hilbert's playful nightmare exposed. And yet, none of these fixes fully erase the unease. None of them stop the mind from spinning wildly when confronted with the deep, unsettling, limitless implications. Hilbert's hotel still stands, glowing impossibly at the edge of logic, still fully booked, still eternally ready for just one more guest, or a million more, or an infinity more, because infinity, once invited, never leaves quietly. Banach Tarski Paradox. You're sitting at your desk. A tennis ball rolls into your hand. Simple, solid, familiar. You inspect it. Stitched leather, worn texture, the slight give of pressure under your fingers. You know this ball. You trust this ball. Now imagine this. Without adding a single atom, without stretching it, melting it, or sprinkling extra material from the air. You cut it carefully, in a way so complex no human hand could possibly manage. Then piece by strange piece, you move and rearrange the parts. Not stretching, Not shrinking, just shifting. When you're finished, you don't have one ball anymore. You have two. Two identical tennis balls, both exactly the same size as the original. The room hasn't changed. The laws of volume, conservation, mass, all of them feel like they should have slammed down and said, no. But here you are, holding the impossible. In this universe, reality itself glitches, and multiplication, it seems, needs no extra ingredients. This isn't science fiction. This isn't magic. This is mathematics. Welcome to the Banach-Tarski Paradox, where infinity stretches its fingers into the ordinary, and nothing stays quite real anymore. At its core, the Banach-Tarski Paradox says something almost offensively simple. You can take a solid 3D ball, divide it into a finite number of pieces, and rearrange them into two identical balls, each the same size as the original. Pause a moment and really think about that. It's not cutting a pizza and moving the slices around to cover more area. It's not duplicating by copying or cloning. It's literally taking one thing apart and, just by reassembling the parts differently, ending up with twice as much. As if matter itself were a bad magician pulling infinite rabbits out of a single hat. But there's a catch. The pieces you cut the ball into aren't ordinary. They're wild, fractured, infinitely complex, so tangled and fine-grained that they don't behave the way regular, solid objects do. They're not smooth like glass shards or neat like puzzle pieces. They're more like dust clouds twisted through themselves across infinite scales, strange beyond any physical shape you could hold or see. You can't actually build these pieces in the real world. They exist only in the realm of perfect, abstract mathematics, where space can be cut along lines finer than atoms, finer than anything. The impossible trick happens because, mathematically speaking, volume stops making sense at these extremes. You're no longer shuffling around real, measurable stuff. You're manipulating structureless infinity. It's like reality itself has loopholes, and Banach-Tarski found one big enough to double a universe. In a world obeying the rules of Banach-Tarski, creation doesn't cost anything. Matter isn't sacred, and nothing, not even a humble tennis ball, is safe from being glitched into infinity. At this point, your instincts should be screaming, that can't be right. Conservation of mass, conservation of volume, physics. And you'd be correct if we were still talking about the physical universe. But Banach-Tarski doesn't happen inside atoms and molecules. It happens in pure mathematics, a place with different laws and different freedoms. The trick that makes this possible lies in three key ingredients. First, the pieces you cut the ball into are so fragmented, so outrageously intricate, that they defy the normal rules of measurement. In fact, they don't even have a volume anymore. Volume, that basic idea of how much space something takes up, simply ceases to apply. Second, you need something called the axiom of choice, a strange and controversial rule in set theory. The axiom of choice says that if you have an infinite number of sets, you can pick exactly one element from each set, even if there's no rule telling you how to make the choice. You just somehow pick them. You reach into an infinite chaos of possibilities and assemble a collection, piece by invisible piece. Third, the operations involved, the rearrangements and rotations, must be absolutely perfect. Not good enough. Not close. Perfect at infinite precision. In other words, you could never actually do this in the messy, grainy world of atoms and molecules. You'd need a universe where distances can be measured down to infinity, choices can be made without instruction, and physical reality politely agrees to be ignored. Banach-Tarski doesn't break physics. It breaks our assumptions about what space even is when you tear away physical limits. In the mathematical realm, the rules of the playground are rewritten. And if you play by those rules, doubling a ball or a planet is perfectly fine. But here's the thing. Once you realize Banach-Tarski is possible in theory, you start to wonder, how much of what we know is just a fragile surface layer over madness? If volume can fail when you zoom in deep enough, if size and mass can be undone by rearrangement, then what else might collapse under its own invisible weight? Banach-Tarski cracks open our assumptions about matter. Is mass just an illusion of structure? Identity. If you can divide something infinitely and recombine it into two, where does the original thing go? Infinity. Can infinite processes sneak into the finite world without us noticing? Even worse, it draws attention to a terrible possibility. Our real universe might not be continuous at all. Maybe there's a smallest possible length, a pixel size to reality, like the Planck length in physics. Maybe the infinite smoothness that Banach, Tarski relies on doesn't exist outside math textbooks. In that case, Banach-Tarski isn't just impossible in practice. It's a clue, a shimmering signal from mathematics, telling us reality has limits, boundaries, hidden lines where the laws we trust quietly break. And if that's true, how much of the universe is simply us fooling ourselves, mistaking the rough edges of the map for the smoothness of the territory? When faced with something as reality-shattering as the Banach-Tarski paradox, mathematicians didn't just shrug and move on. They started building defenses, strange weapons, new ideas, new rules, to try and wall off the chaos. First came the rejectionists. Some mathematicians decided to reject the axiom of choice altogether. They argued, if this is the kind of madness it allows, maybe we shouldn't trust it. Without the axiom of choice, the paradox crumbles. You simply can't make the bizarre selections needed to create volume-doubling magic. Problem solved, at the cost of sacrificing powerful tools across all of mathematics. And most mathematicians weren't willing to pay that price. Second came the compromisers. Others said, fine, we accept the paradox, but it tells us something deep about measurement. They helped create the field of measure theory, carefully defining which sets could and couldn't have a volume. Banach-Tarski was pushed into a special category, non-measurable sets. Sets so wild and broken that volume simply doesn't apply. By isolating the paradox, they contained it, the way biologists might trap a virus inside a sealed lab. Third came the realists. Physicists and philosophers pointed out that Banach-Tarski relies on perfect, infinite precision, something utterly alien to the messy quantum foam of the real world. Atoms aren't infinitely small points. They have structure. They resist being divided into absurdly complicated, infinitely detailed pieces. In reality, trying to perform Banach-Tarski would be like trying to cut a Lego brick into 10 trillion pieces with an axe made of dreams. It's not just hard, it's meaningless. But despite all these strategies, a whisper of unease remains. Because Banach-Tarski reminds us, the rules we believe in volume, mass, identity, are not inevitable. They are conveniences. They work, most of the time, in the thin slice of reality we occupy. But deeper down, in the infinite catacombs of pure logic, nothing guarantees their survival. Cantor's diagonal argument. There's a staircase hidden inside infinity, and if you dare to climb it, you'll find another infinity at the top, and another above that, and another still, a staircase that never ends, spiraling higher, each step farther from anything your mind can hold. Today, we're not just brushing against the weirdness of the infinite. We are cracking it open. The story begins with a simple dream humans have always had, to count everything. Grains of sand, stars in the sky, ideas in a mind. Sure, they're big. Too big for a lifetime, maybe. But in principle, you could imagine them being counted, given enough time. Infinity was just the biggest big, right? One endless pool where everything swims together. But in the late 1800s, one man, George Cantor, discovered something that shredded that dream into pieces. Infinity was not one simple thing. Infinity was a war zone. And the rules we trusted, the basic logic of more or less equal, broke apart the moment we tried to use them. Cantor didn't just find infinity. He found a revolt inside infinity itself. And it all started with a sneaky little trick, a simple move that anyone can understand, but which no one could undo once they saw it. A single diagonal cut, a single betrayal, and reality has never been the same. For most of human history, infinity was treated like a polite guest at the edge of thought. It sat quietly, mysterious, yes, but distant, harmless. Everyone knew what infinity meant. It meant endlessness. Something you couldn't finish, but that wasn't complicated. Infinity just meant really, really big. But Cantor suspected something darker. He asked a simple, almost innocent question. Are all infinities the same size? The gut answer seems obvious. Infinity is infinity. There's no bigger or smaller when you're talking about things that never end. So imagine two sets. Set A, all natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on forever. Set B, all real numbers between 0 and 1, every possible decimal. At first glance, set B might seem smaller. It's just the numbers between 0 and 1 after all. But it also includes 0.1, 0.11, 0.111, 0.1111, and an endless zoo of decimals that keeps stretching on forever. Still, both sets are infinite, right? Shouldn't they be the same size? Here's where Cantor made his first dangerous move. He proved that no matter how you try to list all the real numbers between 0 and 1, your list will always fail. There will always be numbers missing, an uncatchable mist that slips through your fingers. He did this by inventing the diagonal argument, a trick so simple, so devastating, that it shook the mathematical world to its core. By taking any supposed complete list and systematically building a new number that wasn't on it, Cantor showed that the real numbers cannot be counted the way the natural numbers can. This meant that the infinity of real numbers was not just different, it was larger. There are different sizes of infinity. That realization was the first betrayal. The betrayal of the idea that infinity was simple, uniform, or tame. Infinity wasn't just endlessness. It was a labyrinth without a map. It was a kingdom with no crown, a place where counting, comparison, and logic itself broke into smaller and stranger pieces. And once Cantor opened that door, there was no way to shut it again. The idea was deceptively innocent. Cantor imagined, what if you could write down every real number between 0 and 1, line by line? Each number would stretch on with infinite decimal places, like 0.2356283746, 0.4938275637, and so on. Sure, it would be an infinite list. But if you could somehow assign a first, a second, a third number, and so forth, just like counting natural numbers, then maybe you could say, I've captured all the numbers. Infinity, managed at last. But then came the diagonal slash, the monster's first footprint. Cantor said, look at the first decimal of the first number, then the second decimal of the second number, the third decimal of the third number, and so on, cutting diagonally through your infinite list. Now, change each of those digits. If it's a 5, make it a 4. If it's a 2, make it a 7. Anything, just so it's different. What you end up with is a brand new number. A number guaranteed to be different from every number on your list, because it differs in at least one place for each one. No matter how clever you were in listing them, this new number slips out. It cannot be contained. It should have been caught. It wasn't. The real numbers between 0 and 1 form a bigger infinity than the set of natural numbers. An infinity that defies listing. An infinity so large that even infinity, as humans thought of it, couldn't measure it. Cantor had just proven. Infinity was not a wall you could reach. It was an endless hierarchy of larger and larger worlds, each one dwarfing the last. This wasn't just an unsettling result. It was a cosmic mutiny against reason itself. And the monster? It was just getting started. Once Cantor's diagonal cut sliced through our understanding, the whole landscape of mathematics cracked open like ice under a growing pressure. If there were different sizes of infinity, could there be infinitely many different infinities? Could infinities themselves be organized, compared, even stacked? Cantor showed, yes. The infinity of counting numbers, called Aleph Null, was just the first rung of a towering, endless ladder. Above it floated the infinity of real numbers, an even greater size, one that mathematicians call the cardinality of the continuum. But then above that, an entire spectrum of infinities stretched into the unknown. Infinity was no longer a single thing. It was a sprawling empire, torn apart by constant civil wars, and crowned by kings no one could ever see or name. Size itself began to lose its meaning. When you say something is bigger or smaller, you picture a straightforward comparison. 1 apple, 2 apples, 1 crowd, a bigger crowd. But in Cantor's broken landscape, size twisted into something non-human. Numbers so large they couldn't be visualized. Concepts so abstract that even language faltered. Mathematicians were forced to invent entire new branches of logic, set theory, cardinal arithmetic, transfinite numbers, just to navigate this wilderness. Some recoiled in horror. Famous contemporaries like Leopold Kronecker called Cantor a corrupter of youth and denounced his work as madness. Even Cantor himself would suffer deeply, later battling depression and isolation. Because once you glimpse that the universe of numbers is not clean, neat, and orderly, once you realize it's a writhing ocean of endless infinities, stacked on infinities, stacked on infinities, you don't come back the same. Mathematics, once considered the purest of sciences, suddenly found itself under siege. Cantor's revelations about infinity cracked open reality so violently that many of his peers refused to accept it. They weren't just disagreeing with Cantor's methods, They were rejecting the very idea that math could be so wild, so chaotic, so untamable. Some of the greatest minds of the era, Leopold Kronecker, for example, mounted a fierce resistance. Kronecker famously declared, "God made the integers. All else is the work of man." To him, the numbers we could count, 1, 2, 3, were real. Everything else, infinite sets, uncountable numbers, was an illusion, a mathematical heresy. Others tried a different tactic, containment. They built rigorous new logical systems to corral these monsters of infinity, like hastily erected barricades around a wildfire. Formalism, intuitionism, and constructivism rose as competing philosophies, each trying to tame what Cantor had unleashed. Formalists said, "We don't care if it's real. If the rules are consistent, it's allowed." Intuitionists insisted, "Only what we can construct step by step actually exists." Constructivists tried to rebuild math from scratch, brick by cautious brick. Each camp fought viciously, like generals in a civil war for the soul of mathematics. Each hoped to avoid the terrifying conclusion lurking just beneath the surface, that reality itself, and the logic we rely on to make sense of it, might be built on shifting sands, not bedrock. Even today, mathematicians argue over the nature of infinity, tiptoeing around Cantor's broken landscape like cautious travelers crossing thin ice. The ghost of the diagonal slash still haunts every proof, every equation, every whisper about what truth really is. When George Cantor first showed the world his monstrous infinities, he believed he had glimpsed the mind of God. In letters, he spoke of his mathematics as divine revelation, not human discovery, but something given. And maybe he was right, because what Cantor truly revealed wasn't just a new kind of number. It was a crack in the walls of human understanding itself. A reminder that the universe does not owe us clarity, that some questions don't have neat answers, that even our most sacred assumptions about size, about counting, about reality itself, can shatter under the weight of a single clever idea. The monster Cantor unleashed was never captured. It still roams, invisible and infinite, quietly whispering beneath every theorem, every proof, every hopeful attempt to make sense of the cosmos. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of human logic, there are infinities larger than infinity waiting, watching, and smiling. Newcomb's Paradox. Imagine sitting at the edge of a great cosmic table. Across from you sits not a human, not even a machine, but something colder, sharper, older, prediction itself. It doesn't speak. It doesn't blink. It simply knows. And it has a question for you. Are you truly free, or merely a puppet pretending to cut its own strings? Tonight, you're not battling luck. You're not battling skill. You are battling the very idea of cause and effect. The silent assumption that what happens next is still unwritten. But what if it isn't? What if your choice has already been whispered into the fabric of the universe? What if long before you even reach out your hand, the game has already been decided? Not by gods, not by fate, but by pure, ruthless prediction. This is not just a riddle. It is a trap, a philosophical ambush set by one of the sharpest paradoxes ever designed, Newcomb's Paradox. The rules are simple. The consequences, far less so. Before this story ends, you will have to decide. Trust yourself, trust the future, or wonder if there was ever any difference to begin with. You enter a room. It's quiet. No windows. No clocks. Only a single, gleaming table under a harsh white light. And on that table, 2 boxes. Box A is transparent. You can see inside it. A crisp stack of cash, $1,000. Box B is opaque, mysterious, sealed tight. Its contents are a secret. Inside it could be $0 or $1 million. An invisible voice lays out the rules. You may take only Box B. You may take both Box A and Box B. But know this, a superintelligent predictor, something with a perfect track record, has already predicted your choice. Here's how it works. If it predicted you would take only Box B, it placed $1 million inside it. If it predicted you would take both boxes, it left Box B empty. You stare at the boxes. You replay the rules in your head. You run the logic over and over. If the prediction is already done, and the boxes are already filled or empty, then surely grabbing both gives you either $1,000 or $1,001,000. But if the predictor is never wrong, then choosing both means you were predicted to choose both, meaning Box B is empty. You are caught in a strange whirlpool. Trust your power now, or trust the echoes of a decision already made for you. Rational thought collides with gut instinct. Freedom slams against fatalism. The room feels colder. And somewhere far beyond your senses, something watches, perhaps smiling, perhaps not, as you decide which future will be yours. 2 boxes. 1 choice. No certainty. Welcome to Newcomb's Paradox. You think hard. You think fast. You weigh odds. You weigh principles. You try to be clever. And then the first heartbreak strikes. No matter what you choose, the logic betrays you. If you trust your freedom, if you believe the future is still unwritten, you should grab both boxes. Why leave free money on the table? But if you trust the predictor, if you believe the future is already somehow locked in, then the only way to win big is to take only box B. It's a perfect trap. The act of choosing reveals what was already predicted. Imagine it. If you boldly reach for both boxes, smiling at your cleverness, you almost certainly find box B empty. If you nervously take just box B, believing in something you cannot see, you open it to find $1 million waiting. Each path mocks you. Take both. You acted rationally and still lose. Take only one. You acted irrationally and still win. It is a riddle designed to wound your sense of control, to shatter the illusion that reason alone is a safe guide. In Newcomb's Paradox, the universe itself seems to lean in, whispering, maybe your choices aren't as free as you think. Maybe freedom is just another prediction you haven't caught up to yet. Either way, something breaks inside you. And the worst part, there's no way to outsmart it, because you are the one being outsmarted by your own belief about what choice even means. Newcomb's Paradox doesn't just outwit you. It rewrites the very rules of the game while you're still playing. The architect behind this mental minefield was a man named William Newcomb, a physicist working at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory in the 1960s. He wasn't trying to create a philosophy riddle. He wasn't trying to torment undergraduates. He was toying with an idea about prediction and determinism, inspired by physics itself. At first, Newcomb's thought experiments circulated privately, an inside joke among physicists and philosophers. But it didn't stay in the shadows for long. Robert Nozick, a razor-sharp philosopher, grabbed hold of it, polished it, and unleashed it upon the world in 1969. It was Nozick who shaped it into the 2-box game we now know, simple enough to explain in a few sentences, yet deep enough to trap even the sharpest minds for decades. And trap them it did. Since then, Newcomb's Paradox has lit wildfires across fields like philosophy of mind. Can you even have free will if perfect prediction is possible? Decision theory. Should you act based on expected outcomes or based on logical dominance? Game theory. What happens when your opponent is the future itself? Giant minds have wrestled with it. Robert Nozick himself leaned toward taking just one box. David Lewis, another towering philosopher, insisted you should take both. Economists, logicians, physicists all divided. No consensus. No peace. Just the eternal echo of Newcomb's impossible question, reverberating through the halls of thought. Do you act as if you shape the future, or act as if the future has already shaped you? Every time you think you have an answer, the paradox flickers and slips right out of your hands again. It's not just a game. It's a mirror held up to your soul. And what you see there might be more terrifying than any outcome. Newcomb's Paradox isn't just an intellectual prank. It's a wrecking ball aimed straight at the foundations of some of humanity's most sacred ideas. First casualty, free will. If a predictor can guess your choices with near perfection, are you really choosing at all? Or are you just playing out a script, a sophisticated puppet jerked around by invisible strings? Second casualty, rational choice theory. Economists built towering models on the idea that rational agents maximize their gain. But Newcomb's Paradox twists rationality itself. Maximizing says take both boxes. Winning says take just one. So which are you, rational or successful? You can't be both. Third casualty, causality. Normally, causes come before effects. Strike a match, the fire begins. But in Newcomb's world, your current decision seems to reach backward, altering a prediction already made. It's as if time itself folds in on itself like origami, and you're stuck somewhere inside the creases. Fourth casualty, AI and predictive models. The rise of machine learning raises chilling echoes of Newcomb's setup. If AI systems grow powerful enough to predict our actions, purchases, votes, even crimes, do we still have autonomy? Or will we live in a world where our choices are just shadows of calculations made long before we act? And the deepest cut of all, identity. If your choices aren't truly yours, If your future can be read before you even arrive there, who are you really? A free spirit? A complex chemical clock? Or just another gear in a machine that already knows how the story ends? Newcomb's paradox doesn't just break systems. It breaks the parts of ourselves we thought were untouchable. It asks a question that echoes across everything you do. Are you steering the ship, or just pretending while the tide already knows where you'll wash up? And now, you find yourself at the edge of the same dilemma. Imagine, right now, this moment, you are sitting across from the predictor. Two boxes lie before you. Box A, clear and tempting, $1,000 guaranteed. Box B, opaque and mysterious, either $1 million or nothing at all. The predictor has already made its guess about what you will do. You know that. You also know, in your bones, that your choice is still yours, raw and present. And yet, maybe it's already been written. You pause. Your hand hovers. The question burns. Do you believe in your own freedom enough to fight for it? Or do you trust the invisible gears of fate and gamble everything on faith? Choose wisely. Or don't. It might not matter. Because in Newcomb's game, the cruelest twist is that even knowing all of this changes nothing. The prediction was already made. And you were always going to do exactly what you are about to do. Maybe the choice is yours. Maybe it never was. Either way, the game is already in motion. And there's no hitting pause. Not anymore. Predestination Paradox. Imagine you wake up in the dead of night, and your house is engulfed in flames. You barely escape with your life. Shaken, you swear, this must never happen again. Now imagine, somehow, you gain the power to travel back in time. You return to the night before, determined to warn your past self. You creep toward your home in the darkness, ready to pound on the door, but someone sees you. Mistaking you for an intruder, they call the police. Sirens blaze, neighbors panic, and in the chaos, a fire is accidentally sparked. The same fire, the one you lived through. You realize, with mounting horror, you started the fire you tried to prevent. This is not just a tragedy. It's a logic trap, a snake eating its own tail, a mystery with no beginning and no end. Today, we dive into one of the strangest paradoxes ever imagined, the Predestination Paradox, where the past and future become one endless, inescapable loop. And as you'll see, once you're caught in it, the very idea of free will begin to crumble beneath your feet. The question is, can you ever truly change your destiny, or were you always just playing your part? Picture a scientist in the distant future, brilliant, hopeful, and terrified. They've seen it coming, a global catastrophe, a chain of events that will wipe out humanity within decades. They have one desperate plan: send someone back in time, plant the seeds of change, rewrite history before it's too late. And so the time traveler is born, trained, armed with knowledge, ready to stop the end of the world. They step through the machine, leaving the future behind, and land decades earlier, in a past that doesn't yet know the danger approaching. But things go wrong. In trying to influence world leaders, they spark fear and suspicion. In trying to stop a dangerous technology from being invented, they give the idea to the wrong people. Every action they take, every warning they give, tightens the noose. The catastrophe still comes. In fact, it comes because of them. And the future from which they came? Inevitable, immutable, a burned-out echo of their own desperate choices. This, the cruel engine at the heart of the Predestination Paradox, is a loop without escape. The future sends someone to change the past. The past unfolds exactly as it must to create that future. You are both the architect and the prisoner of your fate. The paradox forces us to ask, did the hero ever have free will? Was the mission doomed from the start? Or is destiny something deeper, something that needs to happen, even when we fight it? In the Predestination Paradox, there are no simple villains, no simple heroes, just a story playing itself out, over and over, because it must. It started with stories, old myths whispered around ancient fires, heroes who were destined from birth, prophecies that, when defied, only made themselves come true. But it wasn't until the 20th century that science fiction, armed with new ideas of time and causality, gave birth to something darker, the causal loop. Thinkers began to ask, what if time travel didn't just let you change history? What if it locked you into it? In 1943, physicist Kurt Gödel proposed strange solutions to Einstein's equations, solutions that allowed time to curve back on itself. Closed time-like curves. He called them paths through space-time where you could meet your past self. Soon after, writers like Robert A. Heinlein imagined twisted tales where the time traveler wasn't just affecting the past, they were the past. In one brutal short story, All You Zombies, a single character becomes their own mother and father through time travel. No origin, no beginning, just existence, feeding itself. The Predestination Paradox was no longer just a thought experiment. It had teeth. It shattered our simplest assumptions. That causes must come before effects. That we are free to choose our futures. That there is a clear, linear story to our lives. Instead, it proposed a haunting alternative. Maybe time doesn't flow like a river. Maybe it's a vast, frozen landscape, and we're just walking pre-carved paths, thinking we're forging new ones. And if that's true, then your choices aren't choices at all. They're inevitabilities, pretending to be decisions. The Predestination Paradox is not just a sci-fi curiosity. It shakes the foundations of everything we trust, in physics, in philosophy, in ourselves. In physics, the paradox challenges our models of causality. Quantum mechanics hints at probabilities, randomness, but the paradox suggests an eerie rigidity. Some interpretations of space-time, like the block universe theory, suggest that past, present, and future already coexist all at once. Time doesn't flow. It is. You don't move through time. You exist in all your moments simultaneously, like frames on a reel of film. In logic, the paradox creates loops with no clear beginning or end. It's a snake with no head. Normally, logic demands a foundation. A happened because of B. But in the predestination loop, a causes B, which causes A, which causes B forever. No starting point. No outside cause. Just a closed ring of inevitability. In ethics and identity, if your actions were always going to happen, can you be blamed or praised for anything? If your destiny is written before you even act, who are you really? An agent of change? Or a puppet, acting out a script you'll never see? In AI and future technology, as we build smarter systems, ones that might one day predict human behavior, the specter of predestination grows larger. If a machine could predict every choice you'll make, do you still have freedom? Or were you only ever free inside the illusion of uncertainty? The predestination paradox forces us to look at the mirror of time and realize that the reflection might be staring back before we even raise our hand. It is a crack in the wall of everything we think is solid, and once you notice it, you can never quite unsee it. The predestination paradox is a trap, but humanity, stubborn as ever, refuses to believe there's no way out. Philosophers, physicists, and storytellers have launched endless campaigns against it, trying to find cracks in its perfect circle. 1. Free will versus determinism. Some argue, maybe the paradox only seems paradoxical because we're misunderstanding free will. The compatibilists, philosophers who believe free will can exist even in a determined universe, suggest that choice is real, even if it was always part of the plan. You were always going to pick chocolate ice cream, they say, but it's still you who picked it. Freedom not as unpredictability, but as willing participation in a path already laid out. 2. Multiverse escapes. Others propose a more dramatic solution, the multiverse. Maybe every time you make a decision, the universe splits, birthing countless new realities. In this view, the predestination paradox is a trick, a sleight of hand caused by looking at only one timeline. In another universe, you broke the cycle. In another, you became something unrecognizable. In another, you never existed at all. 3. Novikov's self-consistency principle. Then there's the physicist's answer, cold and elegant. Igor Novikov proposed that time is self-healing. You can time travel. You can struggle and fight and claw, but you will always end up causing exactly the events that need to happen. You can try to escape the loop, but your attempts become the loop. You are the architect of your own prison. 4. Narrative revolutions. Stories have fought back, too. Writers have explored open time travel. Scenarios where travelers can change the past, breaking cycles, creating chaos. But even then, the original paradox haunts the edges of the narrative, whispering, change the past all you want, but how do you know that wasn't always part of the story? In the end, the predestination paradox doesn't just twist time. It twists us. It asks, what if the cause and the effect are just two sides of the same mirror? What if you are both the writer and the reader of your life story, trapped in a loop of your own design? What if the future is already reaching back to pull you toward it, and the hands you feel on your shoulders are your own? Maybe time isn't broken. Maybe it's perfect. Too perfect. And if that's true, then every time you think you're making a free choice, every time you believe you're stepping into the unknown, you're actually following a path you yourself have already carved long ago. Maybe you're not escaping the loop. Maybe you are the loop. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, another version of you is already smiling, knowing exactly what you'll do next. Retrocausality. Imagine sitting alone in your room, staring out a window, feeling a strange unease. You can't explain it, like the air itself is holding its breath. You shrug it off until tomorrow, when you get a phone call. Bad news. Something that, impossibly, feels like it had already left fingerprints on your yesterday. What if you didn't just sense the future? What if the future really had reached back and touched you? Retrocausality asks a forbidden question. Can the future cause the past? It's not just a thought experiment anymore. It's a whisper echoing backward through time, unsettling everything we think we know about cause, effect, and reality itself. We like to think of life as a river, always flowing forward. But what if, sometimes, a ripple swims upstream, carrying a secret back to its own beginning? Today, we chase that ripple. Try to catch it before it disappears, if you dare. Let's begin simply. In the world, things happen in order. You strike a match, and fire follows. You drop a glass, and it shatters after it hits the ground. You say a word, and someone hears it a moment later. Cause then effect. First action, then reaction. Time marches forward, steady and predictable. Retrocausality dares to flip that. It says, maybe the effect doesn't have to wait for the cause. Maybe some events in the future can somehow reach back and trigger changes in the past. It sounds insane, and yet, physics doesn't forbid it. Here's a simple way to imagine it. Suppose you send a letter today, but tomorrow, you decide whether you want that letter to have ever existed. Somehow, your choice tomorrow ripples back, retroactively deciding if the letter was ever sent at all. Weirder still, in certain experiments with quantum particles, it seems like this already happens. Particles act as if they know choices that haven't even been made yet. Time, once thought to be an unstoppable arrow, begins to look more like a tangled thread. And when you tug on one end, the vibrations don't just move forward. They reverberate both ways, past and future blurring into each other. Retrocausality doesn't just break time. It asks if time was ever a straight line to begin with, or if it's always been a closed loop, trapping us inside a cosmic hall of mirrors. And if that's true, then we have to ask, are we moving through time, or is time moving through us? It was supposed to be just another clever trick of quantum physics, a harmless curiosity, like a magic show where we all know the rabbit is somewhere in the hat. But then the rabbit vanished, and reality started bending in ways it was never supposed to. In 1982, physicist John Wheeler proposed a mind-melting experiment called the delayed choice quantum eraser. The setup was simple at first. Fire a particle, like a photon, toward a screen with two slits. Normally, the photon would behave like a wave, passing through both slits at once, creating an interference pattern. But if you measure which slit it goes through, it stops behaving like a wave and acts like a particle instead. Fine. Weird, but fine. Now Wheeler turned the knife. What if you wait until after the photon has already passed the slits to decide whether to measure it? Shockingly, the outcome seems to depend on a choice made after the event, as if the photon somehow knew whether you would measure it and adjusted its past behavior accordingly. In 1999, physicists even built a version of this delayed choice experiment. And the results? Exactly what shouldn't happen. Particles seem to retroactively change their history, as if your future decision, something you hadn't even made yet, could reach backward in time and rewrite what had already occurred. It wasn't just spooky. It wasn't just counterintuitive. It shattered the idea that cause must always precede effect. Suddenly, retrocausality wasn't science fiction anymore. It was lurking inside the math, inside the machines, inside the very fabric of reality. And yet, even as the data piled up, a deeper battle was brewing between two very different armies. On one side, physicists armed with their cold experiments, their unsettling results, and their stubborn refusal to blink. On the other, philosophers, guardians of logic, intuition, and the deep foundations of reason itself. Physicists shrugged and said, "If the math works, the math works." Philosophers cried out, "You're breaking causality. You're unraveling meaning itself. Because if retrocausality is real, it's not just physics that crumbles, it's choice, responsibility, even free will." If a future event can reach back and tweak the past, what happens to the idea that we are in control of anything? Some physicists offered technical loopholes. Maybe information isn't really traveling backward, just appearing that way. Maybe it's just an illusion, a trick of probability and interpretation. But others, quietly, nervously, wondered, what if time really is flexible? What if the universe isn't built on cause, then effect, but something far stranger, a web where past and future weave into each other endlessly, like dancers spinning in a pattern no one fully understands? Meanwhile, philosophers sharpened their arguments, trying to patch the cracks. They questioned the assumptions behind the experiments. They re-examined ancient ideas about determinism, randomness, and the arrow of time. But no matter how carefully they argued, the quantum world sat there, silent and smug, refusing to play by any rules we understood. In the end, it wasn't about winning an argument. It was about facing a new, chilling possibility. Maybe the universe doesn't care about your sense of logic. Maybe the future has always been whispering to the past. And maybe you were never as free as you thought. It would have been comforting to think retrocausality was just a quantum trick, trapped in some tiny, hidden corner of existence. A weird loophole, safely fenced off from our everyday lives. But reality is not so generous. Because once you let the future influence the past, even at the microscopic level, the fractures begin to widen, and the cracks reach everywhere. In cosmology, scientists wonder, if time loops backward at the quantum scale, could the early universe have been influenced by events billions of years in the future? Could the Big Bang itself have ripples of information woven backward from a universe that hadn't even formed yet? In neuroscience, researchers ask uncomfortable questions. If decisions might not be purely forward processes, could your brain, your very thoughts, be tangled with events that haven't happened yet? Some experiments in decision-making show brain activity before a person consciously makes a choice. Coincidence? Or is your mind caught in a web that stretches in both directions? In technology, whispers begin to surface about quantum computing, cryptography, and information that might, under the right circumstances, be influenced by future states. A terrifying, exhilarating idea. Building machines that can listen to tomorrow. In philosophy and ethics, every foundation shakes. If an action's cause and its effect are no longer neatly separated, how can we speak meaningfully about responsibility? If a tragedy today is the result of a choice tomorrow, how do you even assign blame, or praise, or meaning? Retrocausality gnaws at the root of everything we think we know. It isn't just a scientific curiosity. It's a disease spreading backward through time, infecting certainty, predictability, even identity itself. And just when you think you can make peace with it, that it's confined to abstract debates and lab experiments, comes the final quiet shiver. Imagine this: a choice you haven't made yet, a path you haven't walked, an accident you haven't witnessed, a love you haven't lost. Now imagine that somewhere, somehow, tiny pieces of reality are already adjusting themselves in anticipation of what you will one day decide. Not because fate is scripted, not because destiny has locked you into a role, but because time, at its deepest level, doesn't flow. It shudders, it ripples, it loops. Every choice you make might echo not just forward into the future, but backward into the past, reshaping the world that created you. The future is already written, because you're the one writing it. Or maybe the future is already reading you like a map, not forcing you, but bending reality's edges just enough to nudge your hand. And so the final question, the final shiver crawling up through every crack in our understanding. When you reach for tomorrow, has tomorrow already reached back for you? The Polchinski's Paradox. Picture this. You walk into a room and find a mousetrap already sprung, but you never set it. You never placed the cheese. And yet, there it is, snapped shut, waiting for a cause that hasn't happened yet. This isn't a fantasy. It's the kind of trap that time itself can lay for you. In the normal world, events unfold like beads on a string, one after another, clean, orderly, inevitable. Cause leads to effect, just as surely as a stone tossed into a pond ripples outward. But what if the stone could send ripples backward, back toward your hand before you ever threw it? What if your future actions could reach into your past and strangle them? Welcome to Polchinski's Paradox, a mind-bending twist of logic and physics where time doesn't flow in a straight river, but folds back like a snake biting its own tail. Here's the question Joseph Polchinski posed. If a simple object could time travel, Could it destroy the very conditions that allowed it to time travel in the first place? And if so, could reality survive that betrayal? Joseph Polchinski didn't start with spaceships, lasers, or grand multiversal voyages. He started with something humble, a single billiard ball. Here's how his thought experiment plays out. Imagine a wormhole, a tunnel through space-time, a real solution in Einstein's equations, albeit an exotic one. If you could build such a thing, no easy feat, you could create a shortcut between 2 points in time. You roll a billiard ball toward the mouth of the wormhole, and it disappears inside. Moments later, it pops out in the past, a few seconds before it entered. So far, so good. But now Polchinski adds a twist. What if the ball emerging from the wormhole strikes its younger self just before it reaches the wormhole entrance? A slight nudge, just enough to change its path, just enough to prevent it from falling into the wormhole. But wait, if the younger ball never enters the wormhole, then the older ball could never emerge and strike it in the first place. But if it doesn't get struck, then it would have entered the wormhole. Round and round the logic spins, like a billiard ball on a table with no friction, caught in endless orbit, never settling. It's a loop of death. The event both happens and unhappens itself. The cause destroys the effect. The effect destroys the cause. Reality, tied in knots, screams for a way out. Polchinski didn't need complicated machinery or divine intervention. Just a ball, a tunnel, and the quiet brutality of perfect contradiction. He had built, on paper, a trap that even the laws of physics couldn't easily escape. In the world we know, the universe plays by one sacred rule: consistency. You can't both eat a sandwich and not eat it. You can't arrive at a party before you're born. Time, cause, and effect march forward like soldiers in strict formation. But Polchinski's paradox cracked that foundation. Suddenly, it was as if the universe had been handed a gun and was pointing it at its own foot. The billiard ball scenario was not a joke or a glitch. It was a serious bomb placed under the floorboards of physics. If something as simple as a ball could break causality, how could the universe enforce any kind of order? Think about it. If effects could erase their causes, if outcomes could prevent themselves from happening, then time itself would unravel like a badly knitted sweater. A small ball today, a nuclear reactor tomorrow, a civilization someday. Entire realities could blink out, not from disaster, but from their own futures reaching back and strangling their own pasts. It wasn't just a physics problem anymore. It was a civil war inside the universe, where every future could rise up and assassinate its own history. And like a desperate king surrounded by traitors, the universe had to find a way to survive. It had to defend itself against itself. Faced with Polchinski's trap, physicists had two grim choices. One, accept that time travel, at least via wormholes, was impossible. This would be the easy answer. Declare that the universe has some unseen mechanism, like a cosmic firewall, that prevents paradoxes by forbidding certain events. Maybe wormholes exist, but they collapse the moment anyone tries something funny. Two, find a way for reality to bend without breaking. The second choice was more daring. It meant admitting that time travel could happen, but somehow paradoxes wouldn't. How? Through a strange, beautiful, almost poetic idea. Self-consistency. This idea says, whenever something interacts with its own past, it must do so in a way that preserves the integrity of history. No grandfather paradoxes. No billiard ball destroying itself. Instead, the ball might come out of the wormhole at just the right angle. Not to knock its younger self away from the entrance, but to nudge it slightly, ensuring that it does fall into the wormhole at the right time. Tiny influences, small nudges, little whispers through time, enough to loop history into a knot without tearing it. It's like a cosmic negotiation, where every event bends just enough to fit together without contradiction. This idea became known as the Novikov self-consistency principle, named after physicist Igor Novikov. It proposed that the universe isn't a helpless victim of paradoxes. It is a master weaver, sewing every thread of cause and effect into a single, seamless, self-consistent tapestry. But this solution wasn't fully comforting, because it hinted at something even stranger. Maybe free will itself isn't as free as we think. Maybe the moment you decide to time travel, the universe has already adjusted everything to make sure you can't break it. No choice, no chaos, only an invisible, iron law of cosmic consistency, locking every action into a predestined orbit. We might be time travelers, yes, but only in a universe that has already decided what every traveler must do. At first, Polchinski's paradox seemed like a localized headache, an academic puzzle about time machines and billiard balls. But as physicists dug deeper, a far more chilling realization began to surface. This wasn't just about time travel. This was about the very architecture of the universe. If a universe must enforce self-consistency so strictly that it edits every timeline, every movement, every decision, then time travel was just the beginning. It meant that every quantum event, every roll of the dice, every flutter of a butterfly's wing, might be part of a larger, invisible choreography, carefully engineered to avoid paradoxes before they even have a chance to form. The echoes ripple outward. Quantum mechanics. If particles can exist in multiple states at once, superposition. Maybe it's because reality is constantly adjusting, collapsing outcomes into consistent histories. Free will. If you decided to change the past, but the universe bent your action back into preserving it, did you ever really have a choice? Multiverse theories. Maybe every potential paradox doesn't destroy reality. It just spins off into a different timeline where the paradox never occurred, a cosmic escape hatch. The nature of causality itself. What if cause and effect aren't iron chains at all, but feedback loops, humming quietly through every moment we live, tying our futures to our pasts before we even realize it? It would mean that the past is not dead. It would mean the future is not free. It would mean that reality is an echo chamber, where every choice you think you're making has already been heard and answered. And worst of all, you wouldn't know it. You couldn't know it, because every memory, every thought, every dream you have could already be part of the echo. Chronology Protection Paradox. Imagine standing before a door that should not exist, a shimmering outline carved into the fabric of space itself, humming with a strange kind of energy, the possibility of stepping not just through space, but through time. You reach out a trembling hand. Just before your fingertips graze the surface, something happens. The door vanishes, or explodes, or crumples in on itself like a dying star, gone before it ever really existed. You didn't just lose your chance to time travel. You witnessed the universe itself reject it. Welcome to chronology protection, a grim, brilliant idea proposed by Stephen Hawking. The basic notion: the universe doesn't just passively exist under the laws of physics. It actively enforces them, especially when it comes to the most dangerous game of all, violating time's flow. In other words, if time travel were possible, the universe would destroy it before it could ever happen. And as comforting as that might sound, no paradoxes, no future tourists, no collapsing timelines. It also points to something far more chilling. Reality isn't neutral. It defends itself. And it's willing to turn violent the moment something threatens to undo the sacred sequence of cause and effect. The wall is there. You cannot climb it. You cannot tunnel under it. You cannot trick it, because time itself will fight back. To understand why chronology protection is even needed, you first have to understand the seductive nightmare hidden deep inside Einstein's equations. According to general relativity, one of the most successful theories we have for how the universe operates, space-time isn't fixed. It's flexible, stretchable, bendable, and under extreme conditions, massive gravitational forces, exotic configurations, it might even fold in on itself, allowing you to loop through time. Physicists call these closed time-like curves. Imagine walking forward in space, but somehow ending up in your own past. It's not just science fiction. Mathematically, it checks out. Black holes, cosmic strings, traversable wormholes. All kinds of strange structures suggest that time travel isn't forbidden by the raw math, which leads to a deadly temptation. If the laws of physics allow time loops, and if no cosmic policeman is standing guard, what's to stop someone or something from exploiting it? Think about it. Sending messages to the past, preventing disasters before they happen, even manipulating entire civilizations by whispering into history. But if any of that were possible, we should see evidence of it. Time travelers would be common. Paradoxes would litter history. Reality itself might be a scrambled mess of self-inflicted edits and contradictions. Instead, we see none of that. Time marches forward, silent and ruthless, never once glancing over its shoulder. It's as if there's an invisible law, higher than relativity itself, that says, you may dream of changing the past. You may build your machines, run your experiments, write your books, but the past is locked, and you will never, ever touch it. Chronology protection isn't just a theory about time travel. It's a defense mechanism, a cosmic immune system, reacting the instant anything threatens to infect the smooth flow of causality. The temptation is real. The math says it should be possible. But the universe? The universe says no. And the way it enforces that no might be far more brutal and fascinating than anyone ever imagined. If time travel is mathematically possible, and human imagination has already raced ahead, then how, exactly, does the universe pull the rug out from under us? Stephen Hawking proposed that the laws of quantum physics themselves might step in to sabotage any attempt at creating a time machine. In theory, as you start to build a closed time-like curve, that is, a loop in time, quantum effects would explode violently. Particles would behave like furious wasps trapped in a bottle. Virtual particles, normally ghostly and fleeting, would surge into real existence, piling up energy around the time machine faster than you could ever control. The buildup would not be polite. It would not be stable. It would create a feedback loop of energy so catastrophic that the entire structure, wormhole, machine, cosmic string, whatever it is, would collapse before it ever becomes usable. In other words, the universe cheats. It doesn't gently forbid you from building a time machine. It waits until you almost succeed, and then unleashes quantum chaos to tear it apart. This is what Hawking cheekily called the chronology protection conjecture. Not a formal law, but a fierce, almost biological instinct baked into reality. The moment you try to threaten causality, the universe loads a cosmic shotgun behind the scenes. You never get to pull the trigger on time travel. The gun goes off first, and it's aimed at you. On the surface, chronology protection sounds reassuring. No time travelers appearing in your living room. No grandfather paradoxes. No butterflies from the future accidentally ending civilizations. But if you lean closer, if you really listen, it starts to whisper something darker. It means the universe isn't passive. It's not a quiet, neutral backdrop where anything might happen if you're clever enough. It's alive in a strange, mechanical way. And it cares about the timeline. It's willing to destroy itself, or you, to protect its integrity. Think about what that implies. Every possible future has boundaries you cannot cross. Every ambition to rewrite history will be crushed before it even leaves the launch pad. Reality doesn't just allow what is possible, it enforces what is acceptable. We are living inside a system that is self-defensive. An invisible cage built not with walls, but with laws. And the most sacred of these laws is the one you can never see. The one that silently resets the board whenever you try to flip it over. Chronology protection suggests that no matter how much we evolve, no matter how much technology we build, no matter how deeply we understand quantum mechanics or bend space-time, there are things we will never be allowed to touch. Not because we aren't smart enough, but because the universe has already decided. You don't get to play with time. Not today. Not ever. But humans are famously stubborn. When the universe puts up a no trespassing sign, our first instinct is to lean in closer and squint. And so, despite the growing suspicion that reality itself defends its timeline, scientists didn't just shrug and walk away. They started to probe the wall, tapping it, poking it, trying to find cracks. Some physicists turned to the idea of exotic matter, stuff with negative energy density, the cosmic equivalent of anti-gravity glue. Maybe, they speculated, if you could harvest enough of this bizarre material, you could prop open a wormhole or stabilize a time loop before quantum chaos had a chance to unravel it. Others turned to quantum field theory and whispered about possible loopholes, tiny ways to outsmart the feedback explosion, to build a time machine in such a delicate, intricate manner that the universe wouldn't notice until it was too late. The wildest rebels suggested that if parallel universes exist, then maybe you could travel into the past of another timeline, one that wasn't under the same strict protection. A sideways leap, a soft betrayal of reality's firewall. Each theory came with monumental challenges, requirements like infinite energy, perfect control over space-time geometry, or the ability to withstand forces that would pulverize any known matter into dust. But none of that stopped the dreamers. Because at its core, the dream of time travel isn't just about curiosity. It's about freedom, the yearning to step outside the rigid flow of cause and effect, and write your own story across the universe's face. And so the struggle continues, a battle not with weapons, but with equations, a silent war between the ingenuity of minds and the invisible hand of the cosmos. A wall was built to keep us in, but we are species who build ladders. In the end, maybe Hawking was right. Maybe the universe really does have its own secret police, its own immune system, its own defense mechanisms that trigger whenever someone reaches too close to the fire. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a dare. Maybe the laws of reality aren't barriers. Maybe they're puzzles, placed there not to forbid us, but to challenge us. After all, the universe doesn't hand out miracles. It demands sacrifices, of energy, of time, of certainty itself. It forces us to risk everything we know, for even the smallest step beyond the cage. And so the real question isn't, can we break the wall? The real question is, what are we willing to become in order to try? Because if time itself fights to protect its secrets, then chasing those secrets might be the most human thing we ever do. And somewhere, just maybe, on the other side of the wall, time is waiting,